And good afternoon from Scotland. Yay! Where it is currently raining. It is pretty dreich out there, if you want a good Scottish word. The pitter-patter of raindrops can be heard on my window just over there. Hopefully it's not coming through as static on your end.
I see that. Okay. Now we're live everywhere. Okay, cool. Sorry. YouTube was being delayed, but it's good now. I see that. Okay. Now we're live everywhere.
Oh, there was a slight echo there for me. And it's gone. So let's just ignore that. Okay, are we all good to go then? Well, while we're tuning things up, let's just say welcome everybody to yet another fine episode of Lorebeards, where we gather every single Sunday to discuss some. Oh, have we got an issue?
I'm getting an echo from somewhere.
I have no echo on my end, so
which
maybe
is
it's
weird. Where is that coming from?
I'm gonna pull back.
I found it. Okay, it was on my end. I was like, Jesus, I cannot figure out what's going on. Okay.
I shall just dive back in where I was, where we gather every single week to discuss some interesting minutiae from the Warhammer world. We will spend an hour, perhaps 2 hours, perhaps 3 hours, perhaps more. We all know that it lasts for a good few hours at this end. To dive into every single last little detail that we possibly can concerning the subject at hand. And today's subject is one that is very big in the sky at certain times of years.
Yes. So we are going to be perfectly fitting in with Halloween month. We're going to be talking about really and truly the biggest, baddest, most sinister force in the Warhammer world, which is, of course, Morslib, the Chaos Moon, which is known by a lot of other different names, but that is, of course, kind of its most famous big one. It's also known as like the Gravid Orb and by a bunch of other different bizarre names, but probably yes. And there's also Andy version that we have on the thumbnail.
Oh, I really regret doing that. That came from one of the LAWhammer streams where my camera went down, so I had to use a laptop camera. So I was sitting at a funny, weird angle, looking down at the screen like this, and I couldn't resist going, "Ooh!" And of course, the community immediately went, "Well, I'm going to put that on Morslib because it looks ridiculous." And that
worked great.
An emoji. Yeah, that became an emoji for my channel. The good old Chaos Moon. Gosh darn it. So yes, Morslib. It's going to be a fun one today because this is a subject that is so ingrained into the Warhammer world and such a part of it that it influences every single faction, every single species. All of them have their own stories about it. All of them have their own versions of what it means, what it represents, what happens when it rises. And it's going to be, I think, quite a fascinating deep dive into everything that is pretty much not just Morslib, but the Warhammer world as a whole, because it is so influential.
Yes, but I think before we get there, we need to start with where did it come from? What is it?
Before I do the quick where it came from, I want to give a quick description of what it looks like, because this is something that a lot of people kind of don't really get a grip of, because most of them think of Morslib at its worst, because they're so used to playing the computer games, and whenever it pops up in the computer games, Morslib is always full, leering down, looking awful, terrible times are afoot, and everything has gone wrong. Where in the Warhammer world, Morslib is a part of their fabric of life, and it's always there, skitting about, doing different things up in the sky. So let's have a quick description of what Morslib is actually like. First things first, like our moon, it is normally only seen at night. Now, our moon can obviously sometimes rise during the day, depending on where it is on its orbit around the Earth. In a similar fashion, Morslib can also sometimes rise during the day, but normally it's seen at night, almost like it's trying to hide away from the light of Sul, the sun that sits up there burning. Now, Morslib's size varies massively, but it varies massively on a curve, in that most of the time, it's quite small, to the point of almost being tiny sometimes. And very occasionally it gets big, and very occasionally it gets really big. Even when it's at its biggest, it's normally smaller than Morslib. Morslib is the other moon, the second moon of the Warhammer world, that looks very much like our own and follows a similar, not identical phase. We won't go into the discussion about that. Just simply say it's a moon. Instead of about 28 days, it's 25 days for its full cycle. And that'll do for the moment. It looks like our moon. Morslib does not have a fixed cycle, which means it might rise almost anywhere on the. Thank you very much, Cody Saunders.
Yeah,
you rock.
thank you. Not even a message.
You kick ass.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm more than happy to carry on. So, unlike the real moon, it doesn't have a fixed orbit, which means that it erratically moves across the skies. Now, sometimes that might be moving in a snake-like appearance across the sky. Other times it might look like it's following a standard orbit and then immediately change direction and go in a different direction entirely. Now, there are possibly reasons for this, which we will discuss later on in the stream, because it might not be quite as erratic as everybody believes. As Viper pops in and says, is it true it causes Werekin to turn? Also, Twitch cat. I'm not going to put the Twitch cat, but Twitch chat.
I will. Fuck Twitch chat.
So the answer, we'll get onto this too a little bit more later, because the Chaos Moon is responsible for a lot of oddities in the Warhammer world. But just to answer that very briefly, our opening part is, yes, it is one of the things that can cause that sort of thing to occur. We'll also pop up there from Roderick. Hey, Roderick, you rock! So what percentage of Skaven's relationship with Warpstone is just the Warhammer version of the moon being made of cheese? Oh, 100%, most definitely. There's certainly a certain degree of humor interlaced with everything that is created with Warhammer World.
We will get into a lot. Into a lot of the Moon Man crazy crackpot theories involving a lot of the Warhammer races in the moon here in a bit.
We certainly will. And hey, Hammond, I almost don't want to read it, because if it's coming from Hammond, who knows what I'm going to get? Who's older, the sun or the moon? The moon, because it can stay out at night.
Boo! Boom!
Or boom, boom, to go all British with my basil brushing. So it can change direction. Now, what does it look like? Most of the time, it looks like a small green moon that follows phases, but irregular phases, just like a normal moon. So some days it may be a half moon, some days it may be a crescent moon. It may be almost entirely vanished if it's right down to the smallest of slivers. And often it can be as small as nothing more than a wan green star, almost like it's a satellite that you can spot, like the International Space Station, just arcing its way across the heavens. If you don't know it's there, or you aren't looking for it, you might miss Morrslieb on many nights. If it's a clear sky, of course, because it can sometimes be absolutely tiny, and it will just be arcing its way, moving around. But for those of who are staring at the stars, it's very clear where it is, because it's the one that's got an odd orbit. Oh my goodness, Turnip Bandit! Hey, Sotek! Wow!
Yeah, that's.
I'll let Sotek read this one.
I hope this helps with car problems. I hope everything is all right on your end. Your videos mean a lot to me. That's a very sweet message. I really appreciate it. I am just a very, very brief aside. I was in a car accident 2 days ago. I am fine. The dog is fine. We're okay. Luckily, it was not nearly as bad as it could have been. One of my doors is now, shall we say, more inward facing instead of outward facing. But other than that, we're okay. The car still works. Obviously, it's gonna. Thank you very much. That will help significantly. That is super fucking generous.
You are. Oh, a little Haley.
But yeah, I'm okay. I'm good. I appreciate it very much. I am good.
So to continue this little diatribe, our moon can arc around in different directions, can often be small, can often grow, but sometimes it swells very large. Sometimes it swells large enough that it can almost look larger than Morrslieb itself. And that's when things tend to turn a little bit sour. And the reason for that is because whenever Morslib gets bigger, presumably it's closer to the Warhammer world, and that in turn brings a rising of the winds of magic. And if you want to know more about what they are, go check our video on the winds of magic. We go into this into quite some depth. Now, the winds of magic rise, and that causes all manner of other awfulness potentially to occur across the Warhammer world. So the Chaos Moon, the bad moon as it's rising, is seen as a sign of ill omen because of this, if nothing else. And there's a lot of other things too. Beyond that, there's a few other points worth mentioning. It has, obviously, as we discussed, an erratic orbit that can't be predicted, that could be any one of its phases. It could be going in any direction, but on 2 days every year, constantly, without fail, it is always full on the New Year's Day, right at the very beginning, Hexenstag, and a high summer on Geheimnisnacht. And on the night, Geheimnisnacht and Hexennacht, the moon swells full. Now, it won't always be the same size. So that's something that's also worth considering. It's always going to be full. It's always going to be pregnant in the sky, causing all manner of oddities to occur down on the Warhammer world. But sometimes it will be really big. And occasionally, it can rise so large that it dominates the sky. And during events of awfulness, Morslib will always be full and will always be high, particularly if we're looking at, say, one of the great incursions of chaos. During those times of high magic, Morslib is full pretty much all the time. And we'll discuss a little bit later as to why that might be the case. So loosely speaking, we have a erratic, bad moon that wanders around the sky, mostly at night, that causes all manner of awfulness down in the Warhammer world when it rises full. And when it rises full, because it causes awfulness, it tends to be when bad guys try to do their bad guy thing, because there's more magic around for them to do it. Beyond that as well, because it causes a massive rise in the magic and a swelling where it should be too high, people often act differently. And in the Warhammer world, this is where the concept of lunacy comes from. Luna being one of the moons, lunacy going mad, similar to how lunacy in the real world was associated with full moons. Over here, it's associated with Morrslieb. oh no.
What pickup line did Shen Yang say to Quen? I think you are simply tremendous. I don't think she would have. I think she would have left him.
Man. So, with that all said, you've got at least an idea of what we're about to be talking about. Let's move over towards, as I pass over to good old Sotek, where did this moon come from in the first place? Because unlike the real moon, this moon is not actually native, original to the Warhammer world.
Yes, and the bad moon. Wow, yes.
Whoa! Yes, that. I hope I didn't ruin all the
No, you're good. Oh man. Okay, I just have to bring this up because it was so funny. Did you hear about what happened in the last LAWhammer stream when you did?
I heard about it afterwards. Yeah, when I did the horror.
It got so much reverb. It was crazy how much reverb the mic was like. Oh, he's singing clearly. I need to add something here.
I'm quite looking forward to listening back to that because I haven't reached that point. I'm currently doing the post-editing bits to that video. I haven't reached there yet.
Yeah, for like a good 10 seconds afterwards, there were two Andys in the room.
Hey, on this side, I think this is a really, really good question. Does it affect the tides? Yes. I can see Harkon surfing his flagship into Marienburg's walls like a surfboard in Geheimnisnacht, and glad you're okay, Sotek, as are we all.
So,
Oh, do you want to go?
Yeah, no, okay, so I'll add a little tidbit to this, and then Andy will add a little tidbit to this. First of all, absolutely, yes, it affects the tides, but it doesn't just affect the tides of water, it affects the tides of magic.
Yep.
Like it's an ocean. And there are some forces in the Warhammer world that do sail on the tides of magic. A good example of that is Vangeist, the ghost ship. And if you were to encounter a ghost ship, it's going to sail on the winds, not usually on water. So on nights like that, if you are at sea, you are far more likely to see horrible, scary things out on the ocean. Like the Vampire Coast, they would 100% be active if it's like Geheimnisnacht or the Chaos Moon is really, really big, because for them, they're going to be heavily empowered. Their magic's going to be a lot stronger. The vampires are going to be more powerful. The zombies are going to be more alert. Everything is going to be at its absolute zenith. So that's when they're going to be pulling off their big scores. So, like, if you lived in a coastal town, that's the night you should be the most scared, because that's the most likely night something's going to come out of the sea to get you.
I think there's also something here that we need to realize about the Warhammer world, which is not the same as the real world. And it's a massive, massive difference in terms of how the world communicates with itself and each other, the different civilizations on it. And that's that the tides are not predictable in the Warhammer world. They're only predictable to a very small degree. The real world tides, well, they ebb and flow like clockwork. We know how they work according to where the moon is. And they rise and they fall, and they rise and they fall. But sometimes you will get the strangest and most unlikely of tides because of the influence of Morslib. And it's not just the influence of Morslib, remember, on one side of the world. So you'll see it when it's there and go, Morslib's out, something's happening. The other side of the world does exactly the same thing. It's all about how the tidal forces are built by those moons. And as it gets closer and closer, it's going to have more of an influence upon the tides than Morslib. plus all of the chaos that comes with all the magic too. So if you're ever in your cell in some sort of naval campaign for, say, the role-playing game, realize that you can't use the standard navigation expectations that you have from the real world. You cannot simply go, oh, well, we're almost at high tide, let's go. They will take the tide whenever they can, because the tide is unpredictable. The Warhammer world is not like the real world at all. So get that into your heads if you are playing on that side. A great question, by the way, on this side.
Yeah, and that, for a lot of people that wonder, that's also why the elves tend to be so dominant in Seafair, because they have a much more fundamental understanding of the magical nature of everything that's going on. And if you don't have a good understanding of that, you're going to have a hard time navigating the seas.
100%, particularly as well. You got to remember that in the Empire, which is seen as one of the great naval powers, it's only really had magic that's acceptable to them for the last 200 years, and none of their wizards, truly speaking, as a college as a whole, specialize on high sea magic. There's those who are better at it on the high seas, but it's not really the magic of high seas and I'm figuring out what Morrslieb's doing. It requires several different wizards from several different disciplines to be able to master all of that, where your single high elf can go, well, I've mastered all those winds myself. So it makes it much easier for them than it would be, for example, on an Imperial vessel.
All right, so Morslib, where did it come from? What's it doing up there? All that jazz. So the TLDR of it, because we really want to get into a lot of the more modern age things involving Morslib, is that way back, the old ones, I've discussed this in a video and it's come up a few times, as me and Andy have talked about it. The world used to be as a sailor, yes, it is super terrifying. Morslib, a lot of people think, it's just a spooky moon that looks like it has a skull in its face sometimes, which it only does that when it's really close. But hope Morslib didn't drown you out last night, Andy. Yep. You're
the best, muffin baskets. Appreciated.
Thank you for all the tips, guys. Really appreciate it. So, as we kind of discussed in the past, the old ones went out of their way to attribute a perfect harmony to the Warhammer galaxy, really. But the solar system would probably be more accurate. And that included the moon and everything else. Everything works along a very precise timetable that was very predictable and allowed them to be able to... One of the things that we've kind of discussed is that celestial bodies are very heavily tied into Azir and the ability to predict the future. That is a very, very fundamental relationship. So having the solar system in a very precise harmony would make it far easier to be able to see what's coming down the line and be able to adjust and make plans, so to speak, for the old ones.
Effectively, the great plan was put in the skies.
Yes. So everything was fine until it wasn't. And to skip over a lot of stuff, some shenanigans happen, and eventually the polar gates at the North and South Pole of the Warhammer world, which are way up in space. A lot of people think they're on the planet. They weren't. They were giant, like almost celestial things in and of themselves that were hovering in space above the planet. And both of them imploded. And when they imploded, they literally like sucked themselves into like a little thing and then blew outwards in a big cataclysm that almost wiped out the planet. Luckily, the Slann were there to block the initial blow. But when that happened, a just horrific amount of magic and chaos just vomited outwards from a literal two rips in reality in that moment. Well, there were actually more than two, but those are the two really, really big ones. But there were also some like chain reactions that happened on the planet as well. So basically, you could kind of think of it as an entity literally took like a knife to the very concept of reality and just shredded it in a bunch of different ways. And it was a horrible mess. And there was so much until
the Moon Nation attacked.
Yeah, actually, we'll talk about the Moon Nation in a second, because there was a Moon Nation until this very moment, most likely. So you have to think that everything involving the gates, which were portals into the ether, like they were literal big gateways into ether that were so large that giant starships could pass through them. And they were designed so that magic would come out of them in a very specific way. So it would not be like harmful to the planet. And when they imploded, all of that magic got crushed together, which is literally how you get Dar. It is how you get dark magic. And then when they exploded, it was almost assuredly just massive, ungodly amounts of Dar. Probably more Dar and dark magic than you would ever see in any other circumstance other than like throwing yourself into the ether itself. Maybe more.
Just to do a small interruption for clarity's sake, if you don't know what Dar is, which is a possibility, go check out our Winds of Magic video. It's all explained in there.
Yeah. And because there was so much, when there is enough Dar and or dark magic, and it is further compressed, it kind of it will coalesce into what we know as Warpstone. Warpstone is literally it is the Winds of Magic, which is a physical force in a sense, but one that most people cannot see. If it is compressed enough, it will become a literal solid material that looks like a black. A lot of the descriptions of it tend to describe it more as black with a greenish hue, but a lot of artists have made it vibrantly green with blackish hues, which is kind of a funny little thing. But it is there's
a loose reason. Many of the original descriptions of it actually went a little bit more cosmic horror, and looking into Warpstone was like looking into the depths of space and galaxy itself, and it gave off almost green and sometimes in some of its original descriptions purple with wisps coming off of it. Other descriptions of Warpstone did other things as well, but it's not a Warpstone call. So back to Morslib.
Yeah. So really gnarly little stone, but normally you're only dealing with like maybe a hunk this big or this big, and if it's like bigger than your hand, that's a pretty serious amount of Warpstone. But the cataclysm or the Great Catastrophe was so bad that when all of that Warpstone when all of that dark magic compressed together, it made a literal moon of Warpstone. A giant, massive celestial body that basically came screaming out of this horrible wave of entropic energies, and it settled itself into the sky. And
I think it's worth interrupting on a couple of other little points here. In various versions of the older background, Morslib is sometimes depicted as not just compressed Dar, which in some respects was a later addition to it, but the actual engine that drove that gate itself is Morslib. It is the compressed, messed up piece of technology at the heart, which was crushed down like a black hole and crystallized into all Warpstone the world would ever know. That has been changed over time, but it is worth noting that particularly if you're an older reader who's perhaps only read some of the original books or some of the old Citadel journals or whatever, you might alight upon an old description which very much defines it as the gate itself. And it wasn't so much ejected as became very much the later version of it, but it was more pushed upwards from where it was sitting relatively solidly in the heavens.
Yeah, so Viral, this is actually an interesting question in that, shouldn't there be two if there were two gates? But I think the idea behind it is it wasn't necessarily that the North Gate, for instance, spat it out, but more that the two gates shot out all of this energy that met in the middle and slammed into one another. And it was just this big, like completely encompassing the entire planet mess. And it's almost, I would say it's almost that when those forces collided, I almost wonder if that's what birthed Morslib as opposed to the just initial explosions.
So, generally speaking, I'll give a slightly different version. The answer is no, there shouldn't be two because there isn't. So you immediately go, but there's two gates. And the story is generally speaking, that it's the Northern Gate that's responsible. But that's because the vast majority of the stories from the Warhammer world come from the Northern Hemisphere. So the ones that we know come from the hemisphere that's closest to it. And what happened down in the Southern Hemisphere over there, we don't really know. But we do have one story, and that's the actual story for why it's called Morslib. And that, I think, is worth iterating on. It's largely an Imperial story. It's popped up a couple of times. In 3rd edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, it's mentioned way, way back before, I think, 3rd edition Fantasy. And just to very briefly cover this, Mor went to the portal to shut it. And it's perhaps one of the reasons why he is now dead. If you go with the stories that you get in, say, the Tome of Salvation, it's possible after this event, Cain kills him. But there's a whole story to talk about there in regards what the gods did. But Mor went to that portal, and because of the great horror that was coming, ejected the Warpstone upwards and out, so that it didn't affect the planet. Effectively, Morslib was created by Mor, according to that particular story. And that may be true. Whatever happened in the southern pole is not covered anywhere that I've caught, ever. But this small story does pop up a couple of places, so it's at least there in the ether, so to speak. And if you want to know why it's Morslib, that's the only story we really have, other than it's associated with death. And maybe that's what happened. Maybe one of the gods did indeed go up there. And indeed, there's a lot of stories of the gods at the time of the cataclysm and what they did. And then when they eventually withdrew from the world because of the great horrors that were being wrought upon it. They're mostly, however, elven.
Yeah, I will add one alternative theory that I have based on something Andy said earlier that I think could actually be fun to explore, which is that if you run with the idea that the Morslib, the Chaos Moon, is the engine of the original Northern Gate, which I do think has a lot of strength to it, that would have been like literally the nexus point of everything that went wrong. There are notes in the lore that the realms of chaos, or the chaos waste, were initially created because after the gates exploded, what was left of the machinery fell to the planets and impacted into the poles. So what could be a really interesting idea is that maybe there are two, but where the northern one managed to go critical and ejected its warpstone core, being Morslib, into the atmosphere, what if the southern one didn't and actually fell to the planet and it struck the southern pole? So it could be that if you journey to the southern pole, you might find a
big, huge bump.
yeah, you literally might find like a crater, like a moon crater that's made out of warpstone. Which
there could be way cool. I think that's a really good theory. I really love it. I'm also I'm not a strong proponent of more moving forward, but given the nature of how gods are represented in the Warhammer world, if you're actually going to spin it for what it was, it would almost certainly be a tale of Morai Heg, the elven god. I don't think it's necessarily something for us to dive into today, because we should probably have a stream about the elven gods, because they are impactful on the world as a whole, because the elven gods in many respects are super influential and super real. They're definitely a thing. In comparison to some of the other gods, which seem to have almost been spun out of the beliefs of others, the elven gods are quite different and worth a chat on. But the idea that Morai Heg perhaps was up there doing something in an attempt to try and stop it, it seems very likely, truth be told, because they were all doing things at the time of what they refer to as the War in Heavens or the War of the Gods, or whichever particular tale you want to go for. What we know for certain is, out of all of this, is that Morslib is ejected, probably from the Northern Pole, and becomes a moon up there, and it is made of warpstone. There's lots of tales which suggest it's just a green moon, it's just that, but we know now, after many years of developmental background being added to Warhammer, that Morslib is most certainly not necessarily at its core. Who knows? There might still be an old one artifact at its core, crystallizing that warpstone out of it, for all we know. But what we know for certain is everything that's on the outside is definitely warpstone.
Yeah. So that is, to make it simple, that is the overall creation myth or story of it. And the thing that's very interesting about it is a lot of races kind of fundamentally witnessed it and understand the horror of what they were looking at. From the Lizardmen and the Slann to the elves to the dwarfs, they all literally saw this happen. And the second it did, realize that is not good. Because the Chaos Moon is such a fundamentally wrong thing that just looking at it is a profoundly uncomfortable experience. Because it is so magically powerful and so dangerous in a sense.
Cheers, you rock.
What is the Bad Moon's effect on the fish people? P.S. The Fishmen are possible topic this month. You know what? You may have just influenced a poll. Hello, YouTube chat. You look radiant today as ever. Oh, I like how Twitch chat's being nice while YouTube chat's being an asshole over there.
Fuck you, Twitch.
Thank you, Biofoot, so much. I will say,
so appreciated.
I would argue that the fish people would be heavily influenced by Morslib and would probably have a very interesting relationship with it. If I was ever put in a position where I got to design the fish people, they would probably be more obsessed with it than any race, save for like the Beastmen.
You got to realize that their entire environment is influenced by it.
Yeah. So now, whether they would view that as like a negative or a positive would be a really fun aspect of the exploration of them. I think if it were up to me, I would probably have like different disagreements within their culture about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, like sub-factions that would view in very different lights. But
after all, isn't that what that conflict is the source of all fun stories?
Oh, yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of talking about Morslib as a kind of a physical force, we've already talked about that it does have a significant impact on the winds of magic, on the oceans. Gets. Thanks, Thomas.
You rock.
I like that y'all are. I like that people are just throwing money to be just dicks to each other. That's truly the way of the internet.
We stand in the middle, moderating them.
So, what's interesting is that Morslib itself goes so far as just being aware of it can be a genuinely dangerous phenomena. Of that, it is. There's kind of the whole, thing, that famous quote of like, if you look into the abyss, the abyss will look back. And in Warhammer, it's very obvious that the ether very much falls into that. But Morslib is a literal manifestation of that in a lot of ways. Of that, looking up into the night sky or the daytime sky, if it's that part of the year, and seeing the chaos moon, looking at it is uncomfortable. Like it can cause like your skin to start to feel weirdly itchy, even if it's like really far away. It can be a pretty profoundly uncomfortable experience. And if you stare at it for too long, bad things can happen. And if it's close enough to the world where its greenish light is literally being cast on the world. So like you can see it, where there's green moonlight, you do not want to be in that light. It is a bad time. It will mutate you very, very easily.
It's Warpstone.
Yeah, it is. It's Warpstone, and it's almost
huge amount of Warpstone.
Yeah, there's also a lot of evidence that there's more to it, of that it is not just erratic in its orbit because it's made of Warpstone. Therefore, its following of the laws of reality seems to be more optional.
Move on quickly.
Wow, Viper. But what is one of the things that I think we should, if you're ready, Andy, we can go ahead and dive into.
I'm willing to dive into any part of it.
Yeah, there is a lot of evidence that Morslib may very well be sentient in a sense.
Okay, we're going to start with that one.
It's a big one. It's a big one.
I thought we were going to go through all the normal stuff first, but we're going down into the
it's Morslib. You got to go.
Okay. So
go nuts.
I think if we're going to summarize this section, it would be, what is Morrslieb? We've already covered the start of that, which is it's a great ejector of Warpstone in the sky. So we've covered that, but is there anything on Morrslieb? Is Morrslieb itself, because it's so magical, perhaps something more? With that much concentrated magic in the real world, is it perhaps somehow sentient, like a god? It's emitting, presumably, more magic than the Chaos Gates themselves. There's so much Warpstone up there. So does that mean that it attracts demons, that demons themselves around the core of Warpstone that lies there and reality breaking? I mean, we would have demons up there. There is no doubt. If we just follow the standard rules for how demons can and do not or will manifest, the Chaos Gates alone are a close enough proximity that demons can walk around up there at the top or the bottom of the world without any difficulty. Up there with Morslib, we're going to have demons. So immediately we've got populations up there that we know of etheric entities almost certainly do exist. And then it does start moving on to the possibility that the thing itself is alive. And there is a hint or two of that, is there not?
Yeah, so there are a couple of really important things to talk about that tie into this and that act as a branch to
just
later.
Keep talking.
Transmormers. Oh,
more than meets the eye.
And Biofoot just Biofoot just being in an abusive relationship with Twitch chat or with YouTube chat.
I didn't check the cheers there. Oh, you just put that one up there. Sorry,
I did it.
Yeah, you did.
Hugs and hearts to YouTube. But
see? Well done, Biofoot.
Yeah, so Morslib has a couple of really interesting things. Something that Andy has talked about is the idea that, yes, when Morslib gets close, there are a lot of bad guys or nefarious forces that will unleash powerful rituals and all these things. But Morslib itself seems to also be aware of when certain things are going to happen in the world. And when a certain powerful ritual is going to happen. And when those things are going to happen, or like when a chaos invasion is happening, or when some powerful demon is about to manifest, or someone's about to ascend to a demon prince, or Vlad von Karstein's about to wake up all of Sylvania.
Or Nagash is about to do his attempt to do the same. But
and it comes really close. Like it almost seems to be a force that enjoys viewing these events to the point where it will often seemingly come into the moon, or it'll come into the sky, and it will almost hover in place and refuse to move, simply sitting there and watching everything that's about to happen. Thank you. I'm on the side.
And indeed, we do love you, Twitch chat, despite the banter. See YouTube. See a portion of YouTube.
And notable, and we've given some examples, but even if you're playing like the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay game, there is an event literally in the first part of the story, the first book, where Morslib will show up and witness what's going to happen. Almost as if it is watching and enjoying being an active participant and making things worse.
So there's quite a lot of different ways to view this. Hey, Roderick. I got a sense that Morslib moves narratively, and you know what? To a degree,
from a meta point of view, that is extremely accurate.
From outside, yes. But if we just simply look at what it is composed of, let's try and be scientific about it to begin with, and then we can wax lyrical about the other potential routes towards answer.
Yeah, because there are some less bonkers explanations for why it does that. But yeah.
So the 8 winds of magic are all exceedingly strong in a single broad aspect of magic in general. And Morslib is not just suffused with all the winds of magic, it kind of is the winds of magic made manifest in the material plane, in that it is a giant chunk of Warpstone, which means, really importantly, it is at least 1/8 composed of Azir. And now Azir is the wind that allows you to scry into the future, amongst many other things as well, but it is the wind of the future. So anytime a significant event is going to occur down in the Warhammer world, the amount of Azir that is attracted to that is significant, and it draws in the moon. In that the future event is coming, and the moon moves towards that future event because it knows it's coming, because the moon follows that great skein of Azir that is being swirled around, and it can see the great swelling of magic that's coming, that is about to occur. And it is, because of this, Morslib that is, a sign of portents for anyone that is a seer, that anyone has any ability to look to the future. If they look up to the skies and see that Morslib is full, they go, oh dear, that's a bad omen. That's a sign of the overall picture that Morslib is attracted to big bad events. But if we take it further, it's full again and again. Something big is coming, and the moon is coming into it as well. But it's because, scientifically speaking, etherically speaking, if you want to go into your advanced etherics lesson, Etherics 101, it's the wind of Azir, the blue wind of magic, that allows the moon to track its way over there. Or alternatively, you can view it in a very different way, because after all, Morslib, when it appears full in the sky, a part we've yet to cover, is notorious for a force that enjoys viewers. Partly I coughed halfway through that. I apologize. You can read that one.
So it's like LAWhammer viewers. Yes. If you're watching LAWhammer, you are basically the Chaos Moon. Yeah. You're one of the demons sitting on it with popcorn.
You are all Morrsliebers. Oh, that makes me laugh. So Morslib itself is attracted, and when something big is coming, faces or a face starts to appear in it. Now, the most famous face that we get, and pretty much the only face that Games Workshop uses in any of its art, is a skull. It tends to go for two deep pits, like craters, some sort of formation to suggest the upper mandible and maybe the nose, and it's leering down on the world. However, in the actual text, it often takes other forms, and there's a reason that it doesn't get depicted in the art. It's because it's silly. No other way of putting it.
Yeah,
it's actually silly. Because it starts to leer, giggle. It can sometimes be seen to be laughing with a big hee hee hee. It looks like a piece of John Blanche artwork from the 1980s. It's very much a real entity, and at points in various descriptions will have a literal tongue that lolls out and slops from side to side. It's clearly ridiculous. If you actually saw this, it would be anti-horrific rather than horrific, unless you actually saw it in real life, where it would be in fact terrifying. So be aware that the moon has a variety of different faces that it's given, and that does reinforce that concept that there is definitely some form of entity leering down.
Yeah, and what I was going to say is if there was a wizard trying to explain and like suggest the idea that Morslib is, of course, while it's spooky, it, you know, obeys natural forces and yada, 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 they would say something along the lines of, well, when people do these really big, powerful, dark rituals, like magic often attracts magic, like a magnet, like attracts like. So the moon is just being drawn in by forces that are very similar. But the faces are the thing that kind of tends to give Morslib away as being something far. Yeah, Majora's Mask is a very apt comparison of the face on the moon. And to the point where Morslib often is literally reacting to things that it appears to be witnessing. Now granted, whether this, you could argue that this is merely the insanity inducing effect that it has on the people that are looking at it. But there are all sorts of little hints about how it only presents under certain circumstances. And it can only be seen seemingly when it wants to, like even almost going out of its way to reveal itself to certain individuals that are heavily involved in the events that are happening.
And this is where we have to start getting a little bit more complicated and straying into actually it's magic, because there's no proper scientific description of some of the events that occur. Like, for example, if you go up to the barren hills in the Empire, Morrslieb is always full. If you go up to certain parts of the Chaos Ways, Morslib is always full. Hey, Joel!
Given Morslib's perceived actions, is it working towards the goal? We will get to that. There is a character who is very heavily related to that.
Oh yeah, we're definitely going to get into that bad boy. So we'll hold that. If you don't,
I promise we'll get there.
We will. There are various parts of the world where Morslib is always visible and always full. There's parts of the world where the darkness of night is persistent and Morslib will always be full. There's also just that small moment of, wait a minute, if Morslib gets really big, like fills up, say, let's just say half the sky, which I know sounds ridiculous, but does happen. Very rare events. During a great war against chaos, for example, Morslib is often full to the most ridiculous of extents in the sky. Particularly nasty events, Morslib gets enormous. If that actually happened, the Warhammer world would be torn apart by the gravitational forces if Morslib was that big and that close. But that doesn't happen. It just doesn't. What happens is magic is swelling. Magic is everywhere because Morslib is closer. Magic is swirling all over the place. And the big one you've got to always remember is Azir. Azir distorts what you see in the sky. The whole point of Azir in many respects, and the way that it can tell the future, is by the distortions that it makes as you see through the wind of Azir into the celestial objects that lie beyond. And Azir is the answer to almost every single last issue you might have concerning Morslib and what it does. How's it always full? Because through Azir is seeing it through that particular angle and makes it appear like it's there. Why is Morslib always gigantic? Because Azir allows it to be perceived that way without affecting. Why isn't the gravitational forces destroying everything? Because of all the magic in the air. There's lots of potential descriptions, none of which are necessarily always the case. One time it might be purely because of Azir. Another time it might be because there is a force trying to keep everything away. We're going to get onto that when we discuss the Lizardmen, for example, because they are known for fucking about with Morslib.
Yeah, big time. So
Yeah, right.
and even further, like it's got dark magic involved, which means all of the winds are involved. So there's also a lot of Ulgu playing tricks over on the Chaos Moon, and you're having all these crazy interactions all the time. So some of the other things that Morslib kind of does as a bizarre entity, like just looking at it as a celestial body, another thing that it is prone to do, which is super fucking scary, is that sometimes it will
We've got my daughter.
sometimes it can hi Josie. Sometimes it'll make the appearance of its spitting, which is a really, really bad sign. And if you ever see that, for the love of God, run for your life. Because when it looks like it's spitting, it is quite literally a meteor shower is about to happen. Where
the chances of anything coming from Mars are 1,000,000 to 1. They said as green spits come out the side. What is that green puff of light? Uh-oh.
Yeah, and it will literally be hawking loogies of itself seemingly onto the planet, which are big warpstone meteors that will crash down and have horrible effects. Effects.
I'll do a small interruption and say this is loosely what I was saying we're going to discuss in the future, but let's just do it now. There's a reason for this, and it's stating in a couple of places that Morslib is in a decaying orbit. It's in an orbit that is going to bring it back crashing towards the Warhammer world, but there is a force out there that's making that not happen, and that's the Lizardmen.
Yes,
and they're aware of, and this is a really important bit, the Chaos Moon. They refer to it as the Chaos Moon for a very real reason. It interjects and adds chaos to the great plan, the great scheme of the heavens, the harmony of the spheres that were set up by the old ones right at the beginning of what they consider almost time, has been interrupted by this new thing that not only changes the nature of how the heavens interact with each other, but changes the appearance of the heavens, because there's so much Azir in particular being kicked out, but also Ulgu, as for example was suggested, that makes it very difficult to perceive the great plan. But beyond that, the moon is falling, and they do relatively frequent, and I say relatively, we're talking slang terms here, but relatively frequent rituals to basically bounce that moon back like it's a ball. And every time they do that, parts of Morslib come shattering off in lots of different directions. Morslib spits, and you could argue, for example, that the barren hills in the Empire were created by meddling of the Lizardmen.
Yes.
As down come shards of Morslib. Spit, 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 spit.
Yeah, and just to give an idea of how devastatingly impactful these Morslib shards are, there's also a very strong connection with the Skaven, the origin of the Skaven, where what we know as the marshes of Skaven Blight, also sometimes known as the zombie marshes, were literally created by Warpstone meteors. And there was a big event hundreds of years before the Skaven first emerged, where a whole bunch of meteors got shaken off of Morslib, and they came crashing down there, which, depending on how you feel about the creation of the Skaven, may have led to the rats that were there naturally mutating into something far worse over time. But yeah, as Andy was saying, the Lizardmen of Tlaxlan in particular, which is the city of the moon, they are obsessed with Morslib. To the point, their big bad lord Huinid Tanukli, which what a mouthful. He's one of the few remaining second generation Slan, so he's like up there with Mazdamundi. He has been trying to get rid of Morslib forever. There are some really fascinating notes about how he's tried to get rid of it over the eons. Sometimes he has attempted, the usual strategy was to just try and push it out of orbit, which always didn't work. Now, granted, it has often pushed the moon further away, which was a good accomplishment, and even shook it to a pretty dramatic effect. However, this would be devastating for other parts of the world, which the Lizardmen would often kind of look at and be like, whatever, we tried. When in doubt. I mean, but
it's hard to deny it in this particular instance, yes.
Yeah, there also have been some really interesting attempts by the Lizardmen. The Lizardmen understand that Morslib is made out of magic. So there actually have been some notes where the Slan have attempted to dispel Morslib, which is a very bizarre concept, but the Lizardmen believe it is fundamentally possible, though they understand it is absurdly difficult. of the idea of casting a ritual so powerful that they would just kind of wink it out of existence. Unfortunately, they don't seem to pull it off, but it does open up some really, really interesting possibilities and considerations. In that they almost seem to treat it as a warp entity or like a creature born of the ether, which it fundamentally is.
Kinda is, yeah.
Yeah, so like theoretically, it should be banishable back to the ether, which they're theoretically correct, but it's also just a massive amount to try and deal with. And as Andy mentioned, there might be some further things. Yes, Adohi Tega. Yes. Yes, that's right. Huantanukli is City of Mist. Yes, I got that backwards. He's Slanhapek. So yes, it's Adohi Tega.
Happy to admit I can't remember the slan names of
no, that's right. Adohi Tega is the Tloxlan Slan. That's right. Anyway, so there's a lot of interactions there. The Lizardman special character of Tedoeko, the skink priest who's like super powerful in heaven's magic. He is also very heavily involved with all the Morslib shenanigans. Which one of the things that's revealed very heavily through him is, like Andy said, the Lizardmen are kind of in this big battle with the Chaos Moon because it messes with them so much. The Lizardmen are so obsessed with the idea of trying to figure out what's going to happen because a lot of their sacred plaques work along the idea of there being a predictable timeline.
And no Morslib.
Yeah, and no Morslib.
Screwing up everything you can see.
Yeah, because Morslib didn't exist when the old ones created the sacred plaques. It wasn't a force. So with it being there, it introduces a whole bunch of potential issues that could make the plaques inaccurate. So the Lizardmen are often having to spend, like, a lot of people wonder why the Slans sleep so much, and it's really, they're not sleeping. It's more of they're either astral projecting themselves to go deal with issues, or they are basically sitting there doing calculations, trying to adjust prophecies and understandings for the influence that Morslib is having on the world. Which is very, very difficult.
I'm going to do a rare thing, and I'm going to pick up a question that's been popped in the chat because I do think that this one's worth drilling down.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
Actually, two answers to it. One is the definite answer, and the other is but there's also this answer. And that is, for example, is Geheimnisnacht on a set date every year? Yes. Some calendars put it between the months of Vorgeheim and Nachgeheim, and the clue is in the before Geheim and after Geheim. That's what those 2 month names mean. Or is it on a truly random date each year? Now, the answer to that is yes and yes, and I'll explain why. So Geheimnisnacht is indeed a fixed event every year, as is Hexensnacht. So there's 2 of them, not just one. Geheimnisnacht is the one that most focuses on, largely because of Shadows over Bergenhafen, and it's stressed on constantly remembering it, and the first Slayer story being on Geheimnisnacht. The stress of the Enemy Within campaign and early fiction on Geheimnisnacht meant that it became more important out of the 2. But the extra part, or is it on any truly random date? Now, one of the army lists, I can't remember which one off the top of my head. I think it's Warriors of Chaos, perhaps. No, I think it will actually be the Beastmen one. Doesn't really matter which one, but it's got a nice little aside box that says Geheimnisnacht is any night that Morslib is full. Now, that is not strictly speaking true in terms of the imperial calendar. So that's the calendar that's used in the empire. But if we look at the overall world, where the influence of the imperial calendar has often bled into, for example, Norska, up into the Chaos Waste, there has been a lot of people from the empire who have wandered up there. The term has come to be used in general for whenever Morslib is full in the sky, when you pass out with the empire's borders and to the north, not to the south of the old world, where it holds the older terms. So the answer to that is kind of yes to both, but if you want to be strictly accurate, Geheimnisnacht is only on New Year's Day, the very first day of the year each year. But outside of the empire, it is sometimes used in more general terms to speak to any point when Morslib is full.
Yeah, that's a very I'm sorry getting ahead, but isn't there a connection between the forest goblins, spider god, and Morslib? Don't they? Okay, so that is yes, but that's also kind of an Age of Sigmarism that tends to creep back into fantasy, because in Age of Sigmar, the Bad Moon. So we'll get to the Bad Moon aspect of Morslib here in just a second. In that, so with Geheimnisnacht, and we'll get to the dates in a second as well. I'm going to wrap up the Lizardman side, and then we'll continue on from there. Yeah. So basically, the only thing you really need to understand about Morslib with the Lizardmen is that they are kind of its direct opponent. Like, the Lizardmen really and truly are the ultimate rival of Morslib, and there is a lot of really interesting stories from the Lizardmen perspective that talk about that, and that the Lizardmen, in their attempts to destroy or banish Morslib, have indirectly caused a lot of cataclysms involving it, because whenever they mess with it, it either because it's causing like big shakes on it due to the disturbances, due to like almost like a physical force hitting it, because if you hit something made of magic with magic, it's going to cause a pretty extreme reaction. But also you can almost see it as Morslib kind of having a defense reaction. And this has resulted in things like the creation of the Skaven, the creature of the Barren Hills, who we'll get to in a bit, and other really dramatic and horrible things. Perhaps even the destruction of Mordheim, for instance, and other similar events. Morslib is a nasty
and the Maw,
bugger.
possibly. Who knows?
Yes, yeah, maybe even the Great Maw. So with all of that in mind, we can kind of leave the Lizardmen over on their side, because while they interact with it, it's more of kind of a back and forth game of tennis than anything else. But looking at dates, just to kind of touch on that a little bit more, everything Andy says is 100% true, and it leads to this really interesting thing of, I think there's kind of a misunderstanding that can sometimes happen with authors in particular, where there's been some confusion about whether Geheimnisnacht is when a certain series of events occurs. Oh, that means it's a Geheimnisnacht event, rather than, oh no, it's a date. And I think the term has been a little conflated in that it's supposed to be a date, rather than, because Morslib can become full anytime it wants, theoretically. And it often does, unpredictably, which can lead to some really spooky scenarios. But it is also a predictable event, because a lot of really powerful rituals will be orchestrated on that specific day. And there's often a big buildup to it of like all of the wizards in the world know it's coming up, and people know it's coming up, because those are days where they like prepare to not go outside. They board their doors, they board their windows, they make sure no light can get inside, and they get prepped as if a natural disaster is coming.
Hey, Sean.
But
if you believe there's an Andy on the moon, let's just not.
So from there, I think, I guess we should touch the bad moon aspect next. So Morslib as a god, I think is probably the best direction to go next. Do you want to lead us into that?
Yeah, so there's a few things to open with here. The Warhammer world, unlike the real world, obviously has two moons, as we've discussed. And one of those moons is, in the most general of senses, the bad moon, the evil moon, the wrong moon, the chaos moon. But it isn't to all. Indeed, to many, it is the good moon, although they won't necessarily refer to it as that. A single example of that comes with many of the Northmen tribes up towards the north, where they actually don't perceive it as a bad moon at all. They see it as the giver of life. They see it as something that provides them with their irradiant energies of the ruinous powers, and that is, as far as they're concerned, a good thing. And they refer to it as Gyronak, the giver of life, Gyron being the green wind of magic, which is in this case particularly appropriate. And as we move across the Warhammer world, there's a host of different species that actually worship the huge chunk of Warpstone in the sky as a god, or alternatively use it in their iconography, and often at different points in their lore are either said to be worshipping the Chaos Moon, or just reflecting it on their standards or some other equivalent, or then going back to worshipping it and then going away from it again. One thing you tend to find, though, that out of all the communities that worship it, there tends to be one other key detail that's added as well, and that's lunacy. The idea of going mad, the idea of perhaps ingesting something that puts you into a heightened state of awareness, which could just be described as being a complete lunatic. And quite a few of the communities across the Warhammer world that worship the moon, or at least have the moon as an important part of their rituals, include this sort of aspect in their lives, including, for example, bad moon goblins or crooked moon goblins, all of whom have got a variety of night goblin-esque fun times with their mushrooms that induce their own types of lunacy, which come up more than once. But they're not the only ones. There's a lot of communities out there that hold Morslib at their heart of worship. And the last bit I'll add to that before I pass over and give a slightly different angle from Sotek is that the more you worship a thing in the Warhammer world, the more it potentially becomes a thing. So perhaps a lot of this leering, twisted, skull-like face came with time as the expectation of this real power in the sky being sentient became real because of that. I will note, though, that if you want to try and place that at the heart of the goblins and the greenskins, I wouldn't, because their magic tends to be much more internal than external. They don't make other things what they want. They just believe that they have what they want. They don't really worship other moons because they've got Gork and Mork after all. And the time, I was just about to say that. God damn it.
We're excited to wow. Yeah, thank you for the wow. Marvel Wolf and Hammond.
Oh my goodness.
Mormons. Ah man, I might have to use that in the game.
That is a terrible joke. Oh, Hammond, you've outdone yourself.
Oh, which Mormons are crazier though? Oh gosh, oh man, I'll never see Utah the same way again. But so
God, moons,
yes,
bad moons.
So, like Andy was saying, something that I think tends to be a little bit of a misunderstanding because of all the banners and everything, is that I would not say that night goblins propose a temporary truce until Hammond is defeated. He's a menace.
Hammond and all of his jokes.
One of the things that tends to, I think, be misconstrued, because a lot of people see it like the night goblins in a sense obsession in a lot of ways with the bad moon, is that they think, oh well, they're like worshiping it, like it's a deity to them, but it's really not. It is a very important figure to their culture, and they do treat it more as an entity as opposed to like, just a celestial body. So they seem to, in very many ways, think of it as like a creature. But for the night goblins, you have to keep in mind that the night goblins have a very particular relationship with the world, where they hate the sun. They literally, most greenskins refer to the sun as the evil sun. Because it's bright and it's hot and it's really unpleasant for them. But most greenskins only care about the evil sun because they live out in like the Badlands or the various wastelands of the world. So the sun is very hot and oppressive, but it's just part of their life and they deal with it.
It's also worth adding that if you do properly subscribe to the greenskins fungus aspect, there's certain lassitudinous effects that the sun will have upon them as well, meaning that they will fight less effectively under full sunlight. That's again assuming that you take that on as truth, which Games Workshop clearly do.
Yeah, and you tend to see like orcs in particular have a lot of respect for the sun. They use the sun on a lot of their iconography, whereas goblins tend to use the moon. And it's because orcs probably see the sun more as a challenge, whereas goblins go, oh, that's unpleasant, I'm going to go hide away. I'm going to go hide in the forest, or we're going to go hide underground, or we're going to go hide in all these other things, because that's how goblins tend to deal with those kinds of things. But the night goblins are kind of an extra special case because they live in subterranean places where they very, very rarely deal with almost any form of light other than just like basic glowing fungi or like dwarven torches or what have you. And because of that, to them, the sun is like genuinely agonizingly painful to the point where they just won't go out during the day unless it is like a really desperate situation. But when they go out at night, they still have to deal with the moons. And the night goblins have come to an understanding that Morslib, the regular moon, doesn't really affect them that much other than it's bright and a little annoying. But the bad moon does affect them. It does. They can feel its effect. They feel it almost like it's looking at them, which is why they are.
Oh, sorry. Carry on.
Yeah, no. And they, to the point where, and we kind of talked about how the Chaos Moon often seems to have faces. It probably doesn't help that night goblins are often high on something or are dealing some form of hallucinogenic to themselves, which probably makes the Chaos Moon even scarier than it already is. They are terrified of the bad moon. but because they're terrified of it, they respect it, because greenskin culture very heavily revolves around that.
And add to that, if we put our scientific magic hat on, so we're back to Advanced Etherics 101. The Chaos Moon, when it is full, when Morrslieb is full, floods the world with magical energy. The 8 winds of magic, or more if you believe in such things, go watch our Winds of Magic stream. The 8 winds of magic flood across the world, and that changes people. People who are already slightly angry become angrier. People who are filled with passions and lusts get more passion-filled, more lusty. There is quite literally an effect upon mortal creatures on the world when the Chaos Moon is full. There is more magic, and thus people are affected. That is the very source of lunacy. And lunacy is in many respects the craziness that comes with the full moon, something that the bad moon tribes in particular are almost hand in hand with, because they are often high on mushrooms. In many respects, it's what they're looking for. They have a strong association with it, because when that moon is full, in many respects, it enhances their already drug-addled state. So it actually makes them more. They're both terrified of it while simultaneously being aware that it can feed them. Now, this is not something that they sit and have a good think about. This is more of an almost
like an innate feeling. Yeah,
an innate feeling, and that has turned out into a part that has been manifest in their culture. Their culture doesn't so much worship it. Let's use the word perhaps respects it for whatever the individual tribe believes it is. And this is where I prefer to be much more cagey, because to try and suggest that there is an overall answer for all greenskin tribes is a massive overestimation. They make huge mistakes all the time. They just make up shit according to what their local boss thinks. And that boss might think something truly insane according to how it's feeling about whatever is around it. And they'll just come to believe that, slap it on their standards, and wander around as if that is the case. And for them, it probably is. To say that there is a single answer here is to do an injustice to Goblin society, which is far more deeper and complicated than simply there's one answer fits all.
Yeah. But the last few things I do want to say revolving Morslib and the goblins in particular is that there are a couple of theories floating around, or ideas that have been proposed by goblins that are worth examining about why a lot of them obsess over it so much. And that obviously they're out at night a lot, so they see it. What's interesting about the night goblins in particular is that they care a lot more about the Chaos Moon in all of its phases, as opposed to just when it's full, because they often have a lot of iconography in its crescent form, as opposed to just its full form. They make a lot of their helmets or standards into like a grinning crescent moon, which is of course super duper famous. And one of the things that's really interesting is they are not unaware of the fact that it is green. And greenskins are very obsessed with the idea that there could be a relationship. There are two moons. There are twin moons. Maybe they're like Gork and Mork. Maybe like Gork and Mork, the bad moon is the cunning one. Maybe it's the Morky moon, whereas Morslib is the Gorky moon. There is a lot of postulation there among greenskin philosophers.
Yeah, boss, I understand it. Yeah, boss, yeah.
And goblins have a lot of that very deep relationship there. However, what's very interesting is goblins have night goblins in particular have so much fear, which in a greenskin sense often is equated with respect. In that if they're afraid of something, they will often attempt to emulate it by designing their armor to look like it, or have standards of it, or what have you. But for the night goblins in particular, they have such a strong relationship with Morslib, and you could argue so do the forest goblins and even the plains goblins, the wolf tribes as well, that one of their very famous spells, one of their most powerful spells, is the Curse of the Bad Moon. Which they unleash literally creates a greenskinified bad moon that will show up on the battlefield and unleash utter havoc. And it's not the real moon, right? It's not like the moon itself blessing them. It is a greenskin interpretation of the moon, which often has a goblin face on it and is hooting and hollering and giggling and making a racket as it erratically flies around the battlefield, unleashing crazy amounts of horror and death. Now, it's not going to like mutate generally. It doesn't do what you would, if you understand a lot about Morslib, it doesn't do what you would maybe expect Morslib to do. Instead, it tends to be more unleashing madness, screwing with perception, or just ripping people apart with etheric greenskin energy. which is
proper
very,
lunacy.
very interesting.
Yeah, and it's also worth stating that quite a few writers have pitched that that's not Morrslieb at all, it's Manslieb that they're actually associated with. One of the reasons why it's painted yellow rather than green, and that's their justification for it. We all know the real reason it's painted yellow is because that's pretty much what John Blanche did for his Night Goblin sketches that were fucking awesome. Who really cared why it was the case? The why it was the case came later, and justifications have changed for that, where in some cases it's obviously Morrslieb, right? Others will say no, it's just how the greenskins approach Manslieb, the dominant moon, the bigger moon. They actually see that as the more fearsome one. So that's something to consider. Don't try and immediately, if for example you're building a role-playing version of it, don't try and immediately go, well, obviously if it's bad it must be Morrslieb and that's what I'm going to make my goblin tribe be. No, try to think a bit inventively. Think what those poor little goblins think when they look up in the sky. That tiny little Morrslieb means nothing to them. It's tiny and constantly smaller than the far bigger one. The bigger one's the scary one, because that's that big scary huge thing up in the sky, and it's most of the time in a crescent. So it makes sense that many of the moon night goblins would be looking at Manslieb rather than Morrslieb as the source there. So if you are looking to add a little bit of shades of grey to your background, do think about it and consider that as a possibility. After all, we all know that greenskins in general are impressed by size.
Yeah. It actually, if you want, and there is the idea that Morslib on average is going to be very bright because it's literally reflecting sunlight. So they would look at that and be like, oh, it's like the evil sun's night cousin, where it's brighter at night, therefore it's worse. And if you're doing a roleplay thing, if you want to do something really fun and really mess with your players and have a good time, you could literally introduce two warring goblin tribes where one thinks the bad moon is Morslib and the other one thinks the bad moon is Morslib, and they're fighting over it.
I love that. Yeah, and that's the sort of thing you should try to think about, because the Warhammer world is massive with so many different cultures out there that trying to just make them all monocultures in many respects weakens just how big that world is. Hi, Lincoln.
Do the non-greenskin goblins have any ties to Morslib, the hobgoblins and nobblers? I would say yes, though it's not as strong, because they are often tribes that they live out in the daylight. They live out, so they are not as night dependent, which often leads to that particular obsession. It's there, I would say, but hobgoblins are also criminally underdeveloped. We don't know a lot about hobgoblin culture, particularly because most hobgoblins we know are the Chaos Dwarf hobgoblins, who their culture has been co-opted by the Chaos Dwarfs. Whereas the hobgoblin Khanate, we know little bits about them, but we don't know a lot. And Nobblars have been completely subsumed by ogre culture. So they probably did have a stronger association back in the day. But I would say hobgoblins, considering they live so far north in the eastern steppes, they have to have some kind of relationship with Morslib, because it would be such a dramatic power that far north. But hard to say.
I would basically say, agreed. The lack of information about them leaves us with just the general information. And the general information is that all cultures in the Warhammer world are aware of what sits in the sky. Morslib is fucking terrifying. So that's going to change your culture in one fashion or another.
What I would say, if you're wanting to run some ideas with the Hobgoblin Khanate, as far as you have to remember, they're a very, very, they are the wolf tribe of the Greenskins. Very, very big on giant wolves. And wolves have a very strong relationship in Warhammer Fantasy with the moons.
Yeah, you'd want to tie that in, wouldn't you?
Yeah, if anything, they would either probably go into a frenzy when Morslib goes crazy because the wolves are so up and at it, and that might be when that could be when the Khanate's at its most dangerous. Is they go on these wild rampages when Morslib gets big. So
it works quite well with the existing Warhammer rules as well, because as we're going to move on to with Moonclaw also has rules for when Morslib is full.
Yeah,
and it would be a very easy way of incorporating that and perhaps even tying the two together if you ever made a future version of the pair of them that work. I think there's definitely something in that. It's quite cool.
Yeah, because if I was running a Wolf Rip thing and I was doing something in the far north, it could be fun where you have Chaos tribes are terrified of when Morslib's full. Not because of the effect it has on them, but because that's when the hobgoblins go the most crazy and they start attacking everyone.
When they're WAS build.
Yeah.
I think that would work really well. I'd also like to just pick up one. Again, I don't pick up many of these questions, but I'm going to pick this one up here because it's both. Morslib does indeed reflect light like anything else, so it has phases, but it also generates its own light. And that's potentially why, we didn't discuss this earlier, but I was going to bring it up. It's potentially why it's always full on Geheimnisnacht and on Hexenstag, and that's because the generators, the old one machines inside, that's when they wax. And they, unlike the Warpstone surrounding it, are on a consistent beat. So they've got a power surge that happens every 6 months, for example, causing the whole moon to glow, which means it's always full because the moon itself is emitting light rather than it reflecting light. So it might move from a very thin crescent moon the night before to glowing. And beyond that, any other time it's full when it shouldn't be full, according to wherever it is in the celestial pattern that it's currently jogging through. It could be some form of surge, but that's only one answer amongst many. It could just simply be magic itself is working on a particular cycle for one reason or another. It could be a host of different answers, but the answer to your question is both.
Yeah, and there are notes that its phases are erratic as well. So like it won't do what you think where it like goes away and then comes back. There are notes about events happening where it's like really big and full and enjoying what's going on, and then the good guys win and they like kill the Chaos Lord or the Sorcerer or the Demon. And then like literally the next day it looks as if the moon is like tucking its head away in disappointment because it's going into a crescent phase as it retreats. And other times, like Andy said, it's so small in the sky, you can't even tell. It's like it's almost more like a star where it's like a little pinprick. So like you wouldn't even be able to tell if it's phased because it's so far away without like a telescope or something, which if you have one, don't look at the moon. It will not end well for you. But in any event, so we've talked about the goblins with it. The other culture that's really important with the moon are the Beastmen. The Beastmen are deeply, like, of all the races in the Warhammer world, the Beastmen of the old world in particular, but like I would say globally, Beastmen are the moon race. They are all about the Chaos Moon. They are very deeply involved with it. They understand it more fundamentally than any of the other races. And I would argue that a lot of it is probably because they were kind of born. There are a lot of suggestions that they kind of view themselves as kindred spirits. And as it ascends, they ascend. And as it retreats, they retreat. And they have a very strong... The Beastmen perform rituals every single time the moon gets big and full. They will go out of their way to make offerings to Morslib, to hold orgiastic rituals is usually, for whatever reason, usually the term they go with, to celebrate Morslib being full, Morslib being powerful. They have a very deep fundamental relationship with Morslib that I would say is accurately viewed as worship in the cases of some war herds. Now it's not going to be all of them. All war herds are different. You know, some of them worship like an individual chaos god. Some of them don't are more of like an undivided nuance. But I would say the vast majority view Morslib as a borderline divine entity. That they make offerings to, they give sacrifice to, they feast in its name, they attack in its name. When they see it's full, they believe it's speaking to them. Their shamans are calling out to it, and they associate, if they see Morslib spit, they'll go on these crazy long epic journeys to find where the meteor landed, because that was a gift from Morslib. And when they find it, they'll carve it and build up all these stands around it and turn it into a herdstone. Most herdstones, not most herdstones, but a large amount of herdstones are Warpstone meteors.
I'd say a chunk of them rather than a
chunk. Okay, a chunk
are old waystones as well, from the perverted waystones from the elves.
Yeah, which this, unless Andy wants to add anything in particular about the Beastman's relationship to us, this does lead us to a Beastman character.
It does. I'm only going to add one thing before we go to that character who is fucking awesome. And that's that I would modify the most related to the moon with equal most, because I definitely say the Skaven have as much connected to that moon as the Beastmen. But the Skaven don't exist, so technically he's 100% correct.
Well, we'll swing around to the Skaven because there's a really interesting little topic to have about them.
There's lots of fun with that green cheese in the sky.
Yeah, the green cheese. Yeah. So there is Morslib, which more people are aware of this nowadays because he has become more popular with time. Funny enough, since Warhammer ended, because he was a fairly minor character at the time, which was a
tiny character, really. I mean, he's basically just a page in an army list, and that's about it.
Yeah, which is good old Moonclaw. Which there was a particular event, which we'll kind of talk about with what Andy was saying earlier with the Lizardmen. They are there is a direct note that this is related. Morslib got really big, like bigger than it's been probably since Asvar Kul's invasion, where it's described as looking like the belly of a pregnant hag hanging in the sky, where it was taking up almost the entire sky. And then something happened, which we know is that the Lizardmen seem to have smacked it to get it away from the world.
Basically a giant Lizardman baseball bat. Get out of here!
But before it left a present, which is that it vomited out a meteor that looked like an egg. And this meteor came down and slammed into the barren hills of the Empire. And turns out it was an egg, because it cracked open on the impact. And it was what's actually terrifying is that it's noted that it wasn't like most Warpstone. It was purified Warpstone. It was like a concentration of Warpstone that is so much scary. If you've watched Andy's LAWhammer, you'll know that purified Warpstone way fucking scarier than most Warpstone. It is a significantly more powerful resource that is much more dangerous. And this one was hollow, and it cracked open, and a bunch of nasty viscous fluid came out, and emerging from it was a creature known as Moonclaw. A lot of people think he's a Beastman. Technically, under technical definitions, he's not, because he's not like a natural creature of the world. He's an alien. There's really no other way to say it. He's literally a moon man, a creature thing. But he emerged fully grown and he is a horrifying, gross, nasty creature that is so deeply associated with Warpstone that he is always burning with green-black fire. Like he looks like a horrible little hell fiend moving around. And the second he came out, now he does kind of look like a Beastman, that he has very goat-like features. He's noted to have goat eyes. He has horns, which of course Beastmen are very, very big on horns. That's a very notable part of their culture. And Moonclaw started doing things. And the second he arrived on the planet, like we said, the Beastmen came looking for him because, hey, Warpstone meteor could be a potential herdstone. And they met Moonclaw, and the second that they saw that he was quite literally kind of blessed with the influence of the Chaos Moon, they threw themselves at his feet and functionally worshipped him. And Moonclaw got to work. And he is very, very scary because while he is insane, he's known for being just as erratic and bonkers as Morslib itself. He has a purpose, a very specific purpose, where he is moving around the old world targeting elven waystones. And he's trying to either convert them into herdstones through profane rituals or just tear them down. Which, if you know what those are for, you should realize is a terrifying fucking situation.
Yeah. This is, loosely speaking, this is one of the events that leads to the end of the world. Because the network of waystones is an essential component for the vortex working that sucks all magic out of the world. And breaking up that network here, and one presumes possibly elsewhere, because there's nothing to say that this manifestation is unique. There's possibly other versions of this elsewhere in the Warhammer world doing similar things. And of course, there's multiple readings we could make here. Just because it believes it came from the moon doesn't mean that it did. It's very possible it's nothing more than a manifest demon, because there's almost certainly demons up there that somehow through magic allowed itself to continue existing on the material plane. There is nothing more than the manifest beliefs of the beastmen that are down below, who have been constantly worshipping this thing for thousands of years. The fact that a demon is birthed and is almost beastman-like is no surprise. Or alternatively, it literally came from Morslib, and it's entirely up to your own interpretations for your own games out there how you want to do it, but it believes in its lunacy that it comes from there. And again, it's worth bringing up the classic reframing of madness, lunacy with anything associated with Morslib. This is very much a consistent thread throughout almost all of the different manifestations of anything to do with Morslib, which is why in general, tying, for example, as we discussed earlier, the bad moon madness to Morslib rather than Manslib sort of makes more sense, which is why you tend to find that writers who've gone in that direction rarely have their hands slapped too hard.
But looking at Moonclaw, one of the things there are two really bizarre things about him that do lend credence to his idea that he is Child of the Moon. The son of the Gravid Orb is one of his titles. And the thing about Moonclaw is that he is not alone. Moonclaw has a brother. The lunatic prince has a brother. That's his other title, which is awesome. And the thing about his brother is that Moonclaw's brother only comes out when Morslib is full. And its name is Umbralock. And Umbralock is a bizarre two-headed hound thing. We have some very distant kind of black and white art of it and Moonclaw, but it's difficult to really make out what Umbralock is. And it's described very loosely, so you can kind of do your own thing with it. All we really know is that it has two heads, it walks on four legs, and it acts as a sort of mount to Moonclaw. So when Umbralock appears, Moonclaw gets up on his back, and the two of them go running around causing havoc. And Umbralock makes Moonclaw significantly more dangerous than he already was. Because not only is he now far more mobile, but his power seems to grossly increase when the two of them are together. Umbralock, so like Umbra as in darkness. So Umbralock. But what's very interesting there is that Umbralock can only manifest when that happens. So Umbralock seems to be almost more of a traditional demon, or like a demon because he can only appear when the winds of magic are strong enough. Whereas Moonclaw has a far more physical presence, which is very interesting. And they're considered brothers. So I do think it leads a lot of credence to the idea that Andy suggests that Moonclaw very well could be a type of demon who has figured out a way to just stay physically present at all times, which would go further to demonstrate why he is fucking terrifying. Because he is breaking one of the fundamental laws of demonhood, in that he has managed to make himself a physical body, which he shouldn't be able to do that. And Andy, you're muted.
So because I was typing there. That's I think that's a really important point to make, because demons, just in case you don't know, cannot stay inside the material realm for very long unless there are specific circumstances. For example, an area that is suffused with magic and allows it to stay there. A classic example of that would be a summoning circle that is fueled with magic, allowing the demon to stay manifest within it. Another example would be during a great swelling of magic, which is one of the great incursions of chaos, for example. Then demons can pop up and stay up for a very long time because there's so much magic flooding the world. But normally, no matter how much magic there might be, the demon will last for a small amount of time and then just fuck off back to the realms of chaos. But if this is the case, and this is effectively a Beastmen like demon, then we have ourselves a very unique and scary situation. It's not unique. There's a few of these kicking around, but it's relatively unique. And it's certainly in terms of what we know it's doing, which is dismantling the safety network around the world, massively fascinating if you're looking at the overall plan of the Dark Gods and what they plan to do.
Yeah. And furthermore about Moonclaw, the other two things that he's very associated with is he is in many ways an embodiment of Morslib, in that he is a walking entity of madness. So one character that a lot of people probably think about when they're thinking about Moonclaw and I'll talk about just very briefly, is Morgur, who is very similar to Moonclaw in a lot of ways, in that they are both bizarre creatures that kind of come from very weird places. But what really separates them, and I think is the best way to demonstrate the difference between them, is Morgur is more of, who we'll talk about another time, is more of a manifestation of mutation, physical corruption.
Yeah.
Whereas Moonclaw is more of a representation of mental corruption and the moon. Because
I think that's a really good way of putting it, actually, because that's something that we separated in Fantasy Roleplay 4, where your corruption could manifest in one of two ways, physically or mentally. And that had to be done because elves literally don't mutate, but they do draw corruption and they can be affected by it. And that came with their mental state changing. And we're not simply talking about insanity here. It's quite separate to insanity. It's literally a mutation of your mind. It's when your mind, your etheric component parts that make your thoughts work, stop working the way they should do, not because of mental instability, but because of chaos. It's actual corruption in your soul. And I really like that as a split between the two, one of them being a manifestation of physical mutation, and another one being a manifestation of mental mutation. I think that works really neatly for the pair of them.
Yeah, and the thing that really, I think, goes to show that, Quizzer Thomas, what about possession? Like, what if Moonclaw is a demon possessing a Beastman or a bunch of biological soup shaped in the form of a Beastman? That could very well be true.
Right, so I'm going to dive in this one hard. Possession in the Warhammer world is not like the real world exorcist style possession from the movies, where something gets possessed and it wanders around there and priests come along and get them out. I mean, it can be a component of that, but possession in the Warhammer world tends to be short-lived and absolutely deadly for the soul that is possessed. It tends not to last for long. Demons burning out bodies is not uncommon. There's a few stories about how that manifests. There's a lovely couple of sections in a couple of books from the fantasy roleplay side about this. And if you should be a powerful enough soul to take something like a greater demon within you, it will probably burn you up within hours and you will mutate, become something strange and weird. And this is very much not what's happening with Moonclaw, because Moonclaw is a permanent possession, so to speak, if it was a possession, something that would normally be considered to be impossible. But again, perhaps that is the case, which is why it's a good question. It could be the case. It's just exceedingly unlikely given the normal set of rules we have. But he is a one-off character, so exceedingly unlikely happens 9 times out of 10.
Yeah, I will note the only time you tend to see long-term possessions that have any chance of survival, they're elves. Like Malice Dark
elves.
Yeah, like Malice Darkblade has of course he has Zarkan inside of him, but Zarkan's also very heavily tied to a certain artifact. So there's like a bit of a weird circumstance there, but there are also
more communication rather than possession.
Where it's like there's a weird that one had if it was not for the artifact, Zarkan would have just eaten Malice, and Zarkan talks about that a lot. But Zarkan, they have a relationship,
an awful lot.
But there are also like elves that are known as anointed from the old Cult of Pleasure that took in demonettes into themselves, but they weren't able to handle anything more powerful than demonettes generally.
Worth saying that they didn't necessarily take demonettes within them, that they are just purely willing to accept what they are type creatures. But there's a good bit in the Anointed that I think would make for a really good stream, because there's quite a lot quite complicated, but that's way off in the future. So
could Moonclaw be related to the Moon Empress? Could his brother be a Beast Fiend? So they're probably not related. We'll talk about the Moon Empress actually here in just a minute. But Beast Fiend. Okay, so Beast Fiends. Beast Fiends are a very specific concept that have a very strict definition of Beastmen, and this is according to a single author. I will note as well. This was never repeated as a concept.
Yeah.
I think it was Rob Sanders.
Can't recall who wrote it.
It was Rob Sanders. He introduced the concept in the Archaon series of Archaon went to the Southern Pole, and he had to figure out what the hell he was going to populate the Southern Pole with, which we know, according to the Beastmen Army books, that the Southern Chaos Wastes are covered in Beastmen. There are fuck tons of Beastmen down there. And what happened was that he decided to he filled it with a kind of like an advanced species that he dubbed as Beast Fiends, which are beastmen that mated with demons and created like half hybrid creatures, which is a very it's a very difficult topic, but because it's in the Southern Chaos Wastes, it's like maybe kinda, but it's very weird, and it's never really been used since then, because it doesn't really make sense anywhere else in the world. Because anytime they tried to introduce, like in the Liber Chaotica, there's an awesome section about what succubi and incubi are, which are demons that wanted to take on physical forms. And the demons had to go through this super fucking elaborate set of situations. But the only thing they succeeded in doing was creating bodies that did not have souls that they could then possess and use as their own. And that was the furthest they were able to go with that. There are characters in the setting who claim to be the descendants of demons. I personally don't think that's possible. I think those characters are all full of shit, and they are either created by someone that was possessed by a demon, which maybe had some interesting effects, or alternatively, they had mundane parents and are just trying to boost up their own legends.
I'll add that I don't think they're necessarily full of shit. There's lots of examples of etheric entities that have somehow managed to move into the real world. The classic example would be descendant of God, which is just a different way of saying descendant of demon, because they are ultimately the same sort of entity. They're an etheric entity, but perhaps aligned to something different, or perhaps aligned to nothing. I think it would be possible under certain circumstances. I wouldn't eradicate it entirely, but I will nevertheless still strongly support the central thesis that I think they're full of shit.
Yeah, but Beast Fiends,
I always like to have the shades of grey.
Yeah, if Beast Fiends do exist, they are probably individuals, not a race. And even if they do exist as individuals, they're very, very rare. But Umberlock would not fall under the definition of a Beast Fiend at all, because his body is etheric. He only can exist when the magic is strong enough.
I think the answer there is Moonclaw related? No, not really. And could this be? No, not really. So, but still fascinating.
And then Riggs here. Thank you, sir.
I missed that one.
First, thanks for all the streams. You're welcome. Second, any connection between Morslib and the Great Horned Rat? Yes, we're going to get into that in just a minute.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So the last few things we're saying about Moonclaw, just like Morslib, one of Moonclaw's very innate powers that's fascinating, and why I talk about that he represents mental corruption, is that he has an ability known as Wave of Insanity, which is literally that Moonclaw is such a perverse concept, an entity, that just looking at him or being around him causes your perception of reality to get really messed up. And that he literally causes friend and foe. Their ability to understand what's going on around them is very, very heavily hurt by him being there, because just looking at him causes your brain to start struggling. In that he, in tabletop terms, he literally caused everyone around him to gain the stupidity rule.
Stupidity trait, yeah.
But it basically represented that he was making people just go absolutely loony, pun intended. Correct use of the word, but and that is his fundamental relationship, is that he is madness in a lot of ways incarnate.
I really like tying it to the mental mutations. I think that works really well. And it also creates a slightly different way of viewing creatures like the Jabberslithe as well. Particularly given the close relations between them being from the same army list, for example. Yeah, there's definitely something in there. I feel like there's a connection that should be made there. Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah, the other thing that's actually super interesting about him is a lot of people would probably expect that being a so-called child of Morslib, that he would draw in the winds of magic. Which he is a wizard, like he can use magic. He can wield, I think, shadow magic and death magic, if I remember right.
Oh, he had wild, didn't he?
Wild is, I think he could pick between those three. Wild's being the fundamental Beastmen lore, which is just their version of Dar. But what's interesting about Moonclaw is that he doesn't actually draw in magic in the sense that he can like use more of it. He actually repels magic because he has pretty significant magic resistance. And that it almost seems like Morslib or himself is able to affect the winds to protect him from harmful incarnations of magic, which is really weird and really interesting. Because you would think that it would be, he's able to draw in magic and therefore use more powerful spells, but it's more that he's able to manipulate the winds around him so that magic cannot be used to harm him. Unless the wizard doing it is very, very good at controlling the winds of magic.
Or absorption. There could be something else.
Theoretically he could be absorbing it. But it's very, very interesting. And then the last thing he does, which he can only do when the moon is full, other than summoning Umberlock, is that if Morslib is full, he literally can make a gesture and call upon his parent to defend him. And Morslib will start spitting meteors onto the battlefield, which is insane, because it's not like he's casting, it's not like he's casting Comet. He literally like reaches up his claw and goes, and then a few seconds later, Warpstone meteors start impacting the battlefield.
Thanos is it. He Thanos is it.
Yeah, which I will say is probably the absolute strongest support that he is what he says he is. But
in many respects, though, it could just be a spell. I mean, I'm happy to always add those shades of grey. Me personally, if I'm writing and using it, I'm definitely writing and using that character from the perspective that everyone believes it is what it says, including itself. However, as to whether it is that, I think you'll find that Games Workshop will never completely pin those things down, because it almost lessens the lore to do so, because it means that then that is a thing rather than it could be a thing, which in the mystery in many respects means more things could possibly be the case in future.
Yeah.
And they very rarely like tying writers down to, well, if you're doing that thing, it has to be that, because that's what that is. They'd much rather say, well, we've got this thing already, why don't you do your thing, and we'll try to make sure that they don't necessarily let's say contradict each other while simultaneously still existing. You've got to try and make everything massage into place. And yeah, I really like where we've landed in terms of its description, though.
Yeah,
because it works really well.
And I will just note a couple of little random comments. Be'lakor was possessing a Norskin when this happened, which, you know, you could argue like he is his father, but it's also through a possession instance. Be'lakor likes possession, even though everyone Be'lakor possesses usually only lasts for a very, very tiny amount of time before they burn out, because having Be'lakor inside of you is very hard.
Yeah.
And then is he more insane than Morgur? That's kind of like comparing apples to oranges. Yeah. I will note that Moonclaw seems to have a better understanding of what's going on around him. And he seems to have an actual plan and is like doing things very structurally.
It's a little bit like saying, is the Joker more insane than some other mad individual? They're just mad in a very different way, but the Joker has plans and is utterly mental, but definitely has plans.
Yeah, I would say
they're different.
Yeah, that would be. I would say that the best way I can answer it is that Moonclaw seems to have a better perception of reality than Morgur does. But Morgur is messier. Is the best way I could say it. But anyway, so that's
let's change it. Let's go back to our actual description of it. Morgur is insane. Moonclaw is filled with mental mutations. One's insane because of their mutations, the other one's the insanity caused by the mutation. They're two very different types of insanity. One caused by corruption, the other one caused by the effects of corruption.
Yeah. So I think we're good on Moonclaw for now. I will say, though, for Moonclaw, if you there is a lot of suggestion Cubicle 7 might be using him in the near future. He's been appearing in more and more of their books associated with the Red Crown post The Enemy Within, which is really exciting. Hopefully we get to see them do something with him because apparently the Red Crown, who have some really fun things involving Beastmen, have become aware of Moonclaw, and they think he's really cool, which is probably going to be really bad.
Alrighty, Skaven.
I'm going to do one quick thing on Quen, and then we can do Skaven. So I'm going to touch on the just because it's so short
thing.
Yeah. So a lot of people ask about Quen, the Moon Empress. She does have a similar circumstance to Moonclaw in that they both seem to be lunar entities, though they're from two different moons. Quen originates from Morslib, the real moon, or the original moon, and then Moonclaw came from Morslib, the Chaos Moon. What's interesting is that Quen is said to be the last of her kind, the last of her species. There seems to be a very strong suggestion that when Chaos first came into the world and the big shockwave went off, that probably obliterated whatever civilization lived on Morslib, because they were not protected against that shockwave, and they were also isolated on a much smaller sphere out in space, and they all. The way I can see it is that maybe, which could actually fact, but Morslib started to affect them. Maybe the creatures that live on Morslib, like Moonclaw or just demons, started to attack the regular moon. Sotek.
Is it both of us that's going down? Because he's roboing at my side, although he's just cleared up now. It looks like you're clear. Go.
Am I clear? Am I clear?
Looks like you're clear for me.
Good?
For me, at least, you're clear. Yeah.
Yeah, chat's got a little bit of a delay, so
damn Morslib.
Okay, I'm good now, apparently. All right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Go.
Weird. But it could be that either, so the two real situations are either that when Chaos initially showed up, the moon got obliterated, or, and I think could be a really, really fun idea, is that Morslib and the entities upon it started attacking Manslib. And the civilization that was there was suddenly under assault from something they probably thought was not possible, and were defending themselves against endless hordes of demons and whatever the hell Moonclaw is, which could be a really, really fun little storyline.
I think there's definitely a lot in that, because it also gives a reason for interaction and enmity on the ground, in that we have ourselves an entity that comes from Morslib and an entity that comes from Manslib, and we can build hatreds between them and use them as interesting story fodder. And not to use that seems to be just a waste of time. If you've got all this cool shit, you're as well to use as much of this cool shit to make cool stories with that you possibly can. And how could you not want to tie together these two moon-like entities sitting around? There's one thing that's also worth noting. Our good old Manslib side of things, they are definitely shapeshifters. So rather than taking the lunatic aspect of moon stuff that we have in the real world, they're taking the shape-shifting aspect of it, and that's passed down to her kids in turn. And I think that is definitely worth looking at as an overall potential source for shape-shifting inside the Warhammer world as a whole, and building some interesting stories there too. Because if we want to look at this as a bigger story, what was on Manslib when the cataclysm occurred? We can see some things for certain, and it's something that we often forget when we're thinking of Warhammer as a whole, because we think of Warhammer, quite literally in the title, fantasy. It's a post-apocalyptic setting where several thousand years earlier it was high sci-fi, really high sci-fi. And the idea that there was nothing on the moon is farcical, ridiculous, silly. It is an entire system, and I do mean the entire solar system, that was populated by the Old Ones and the Old Ones' plan, and it blew up on the Warhammer world and went wrong. That means that several of the other planets are also probably populated with stuff, be that Vedra or whatever other planet you happen to want to pop out to. Those that are physical and capable of sustaining life probably do. Manslib, we know, had some form of life because we have a character that came from there. So it almost certainly had a whole host of life there as well. So what have we got left of that? One enormously powerful individual. And I think there's some great stories that can be told from that. And Morslib jumping into the middle of this should be a part of that tale, because we have an invader moving into the great plan, and it makes sense to try and ensure that they are antagonistically placed. And if you've got that as a tool as a storyteller, it seems almost a shame not to at least use it a bit. And I really like the idea suggested there, where we have ourselves swarms of demons moving out and ripping apart the Old Ones' plans that were sitting up on Manslib, and a single survivor, perhaps out in a pod, a little bit like C-3PO and R2-D2, and landing their way down on the Warhammer world. And that's lovely.
You joke, AV Pick Stream, but I can guarantee you there have been goblins that have attempted to launch other goblins at the moon via catapult. There is no way that has not happened.
We are going to be moving on to the Skaven very soon, and they have indeed attempted this and possibly succeeded.
Yes, that is also very true. And
probably succeeded.
Yeah, where was Manslib when the Westfold fell? Why should we help them? Yeah, okay. So Skaven. Skaven. So we've talked about a little bit how Morslib is intrinsically tied to the Skaven just through their creation. It is very, very heavily suggested.
So I don't know if Sotek is frozen for everyone else, but he has for me. Oh, you're back again.
What is going on? Behave yourself, internet. Anyway,
you're back again, so just go.
Yeah. So when the Morslib seems to have played a fundamental relationship in the creation of the Skaven, in that it showered a bunch of Warpstone, a ton, like we're talking a very notable amount, not just one big hunk, but like tons and tons and tons of shards rained down on what we now know as the zombie marshes, in Talea, or more accurately, the marshes outside of Skavenblight, and this seems to have led to a bunch of rats mutating into what we know as the Skaven. Now, there is, of course, the only thing we know, I was about to say for sure, but that would not be accurate. The only real myth we have about the creation of the Skaven is the Doom of Khazvar, which talks about that there is an entity who appears in the city of Khazvar, which was a real place. It was like one of these amazingly superpowered city of men. It's very strongly associated with Myrmidia. There are some notes, I want to say back in the Tome of Salvation.
Yeah, it was. I wrote this bit.
Yeah, that suggests that Myrmidia was the patron of Khazvar, and that she was originally, and we do know that she was not originally the goddess of strategy and war. In a sense, she was a pacifist god. She was a goddess of civilization, and and the story kind of I like how I'm talking this, even though Andy's the one that wrote it, but I'll let him correct me.
It's much more fun. So the chunks of Morslib hit some Tillian guy's eye like a big pizza pie. That's a Morslib.
Yes. Also,
Biofit,
thank you for the bits to help defend
that.
Morslib is, see, this is why Morslib is dangerous. It knows I'm talking about it, so it's starting to fuck with my internet to try and stop things. But anyway, so Khazvar,
kill cut internet, kill cut.
the basic idea, and Andy can add to this because he's the one that wrote it, as he wishes, of course. But the basic idea is that basically they were a very, very powerful civilization. It seems likely that the gods that they worshipped were directly involved in how advanced they were, and gave them a lot of knowledge and power and all of these things. And they got content. They got borderline lazy. And Khazvar, which some versions of the story say Khazvar was a man who named the city after himself, or that it was just the name of the city itself. Both could be true, of course. And that they got arrogant, and it basically turns into the Tower of Babel, where they decide to build a tower that seems to originally have had the idea of, oh, we're going to build a tower to honor the gods. And then it turned more into, no, we're going to build a tower so we can go to where the gods are to show them how awesome we are. And this tower took them centuries to build, and it eventually got to the point where they couldn't finish it. And then a mysterious stranger showed up, and they were looking at this tower going, this is really upsetting. We really want to capstone this thing. We really want to finish it, but it's kind of beyond our skill at this point. So they could have just called it quits and realized their hubris. But instead, a mysterious stranger comes in and says, hey, I'll finish that tower for you in a single night. And all I ask in return, you don't have to pay me. You don't have to give me anything. Just let me add a offering to my own god on the top. That's all I ask. And they said, oh, sure. Great. Easy deal. Easy deal. Like the damn fools they were. And sure enough, the tower is finished in a single night, and it's capstoned with a wicked bell that begins to toll, and it tolls 13 times over the course of, I think, 13 days. And each time it tolls, the situation gets worse and worse. Clouds come in, it begins to rain, everything begins to flood and turn into a slurry in a marsh. The dwarves that lived beneath Khazvar within the mountain, who used to be very amicable with them, start to become much more cagey and insular, and they all start arguing with each other. Infighting starts. The dwarves tell them, fuck you guys, you're on your own. They seal the hold. The fields are ruined. They start running out of food. Rats start coming in. The rats start getting bigger. They start eating the children. They start eating the people. And it just gets worse and worse and worse until on the 13th day, the humans get desperate enough that they break into the dwarf hold because they want food and help. And down in the darkness, they find the dwarves are all dead and have been devoured. And as they see that, they see they're surrounded by red, beady eyes in the darkness. And it's the Skaven, the actual men rats that swarm them and eat them all alive. And that is the fall of Khazvar. And it's super spooky and terrifying.
Yeah, so I love this tale. It's been retold a couple of times. I've first encountered it all the way back in terms of the first iterations of it when the Skaven were very first being created for the Skaven army list in their newer form. And a White Dwarf article had a nice bit about it, and then it got retold again for the role-playing game in a slightly different way. And when we were doing the Tome of Salvation, what we were attempting to do was try and marry that with all of the other tales that were kicking around in the world, particularly given that we had ourselves a goddess, Myrmidia, that required a great deal more connection to the people that were in the area than had been previously written, even though she was supposedly the goddess of that particular area. So we had to cover that part. But we also had an awful lot of elven myth that had been interlaced into the earlier people of the Tillians. So eventually, to cut a long story short, the behind-the-scenes version of what led up to that was that we're dealing with the Tylos tribe of people. So that's another tribe, let's say the Umberigans, or alternatively the Bretonii, or any of the other tribes of humans. And in this case, it's the Tylos people who were eventually going to found Tilly as we know it today. And this is one city in the north of these people. And most of their cities are built on elven ruins, and the elven ruins are interlaced full of representations of the elven gods. Many of these gods became core to the Tillian people, whether it's Mor with Morai Heg, whether Quen, and strangely enough, Cain, and they reiterated Myrmidia is a representation of one of them, and Myrmidia became central to them. And it said, according to how you want to spin it at this point, that either A, the people of Tylos thought that they were elevated by gaining access to all this information. They knew more, that indeed as a people, they were miles ahead of what was happening up in the Empire, where they were basically at this point tribal people. Down here it is a strong civilized civilization. They're speaking what we now call classical as a language. They're way ahead, and they reached the point of apathy and boredom, so to speak, far earlier than others. And they also reached the point of hubris, and in their pride attempted to reach the very gods that they themselves had handed to them by the elves, and their versions of those gods. And that went very, very wrong.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that this entity that arrived, there's a lot of arguments about who it is. A lot of people in the fan community like to say it was Ancient Nurgle. I don't go with either of those theories. I personally believe it's just the Horned Rat himself appearing in guise, especially because he plays the role that the Horned Rat does. He is Ruination. He is the inheritor. And I could see my internet is being all wonky.
You're doing fine on my side.
Well, if I get wonky, you know, someone
if you get wonky and I'm still here, I'll just warble on about something.
That's fine. So the Great Horned Rat, he is a god of ruination. He's a god that inherits everything else that falls apart, and he is there to ruin it so that he then lords above it. And it's a great story I want to dive more into, but that's better saved for like a Myrmidia episode.
I have, and I think there is a really good story, and I'm only going to say one little thing that I think will go for a Myrmidia episode, and that's one question that actually pops up here. Yes, absolutely. That was the original design as Graham Davis put it in for the first edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay book. Athena very much became Myrmidia. Myrmidia, however, developed, and the very name Myrmidia is based on the classical meaning beloved of Mor, which is Morslib. And that ties through to the destruction and creation of the Skaven. And there was a reason that was tied together. And Myrmidia as an idea, and the name and where it comes from and who she is and what goddess she actually represents was all wrapped up into this creation of the Skaven. And ultimately, Morslib, the beloved of Mor, Myrmidia. It's not even her real name per se. It's the name that they use for her because she's Mor's beloved daughter. And indeed, that brings about the end of Khazvar.
Hey, Andy Morshammer. Andy Law personally told me that there used to be zombies, vampire lords, and undead cities near Khazvar before the fall. Is that true?
Sort of. And by that, I mean the empire from Nehekara expanded all the way up here and beyond the borders and into parts of the empire. So were there zombies? Not per se. Were there vampire lords? Well, yeah, just look at Nehekara and its entire story and the answer will be there. Were there undead cities, though? now we're getting closer to something that could potentially pop up. And this is something that pops up in a few novels, and it pops up in one of the expansions for 2nd edition as well, with Lure of the Lich Lord, Lich Lord, whatever, where there is entire undead pyramids well beyond the expected borders that we see today. And is there one up there? You know, very likely there was an expansion in that area. It just hasn't been dealt with yet. And that was unexpectedly a cogent question that wasn't.
Yeah, I know from Hammond. Yeah,
I'm a little bit surprised. I'm taken back. So anyway, we need to get to
back to Morslib.
Morslib and our Skaven. Now, Morslib, just to cut all of this story down into its nubbins here, Morslib becomes central to how Skaven work with their religion. When Morslib is full, that is not just a great event in terms of the mythological aspects of it or the magical aspects of it. It is for them a spiritual event. It's tied directly through to the Horned Rat in many respects. Many Skaven believe that Morslib is effectively just the Horned Rat showering them with presents. Indeed, when we were building up the first iterations for the Horned Rat book, it was quite important that all of the images of Morslib had a Horned Rat head put on it. Because in many respects, they believe that's the Horned Rat. And when the Skaven look up and they see a big, huge moon in the sky, they don't see a grinning skull. They see the Horned Rat himself with curling horns wrapped around it. It is quite literally the Horned Rat up there, their god, doing his thing. So yes, central to the very religion of the Skaven, and thus super important to them.
Yeah, what's really interesting about Morslib, the Skaven probably have one of the most hilarious relationships with it, because the Skaven have genuine philosophical debates within their, or should I say scientific debates within their communities, how the different clans think what Morslib actually is. And yes, please hit that like button. Really appreciate it. It helps get more eyes on these streams, and we really appreciate that.
Thanks, Richard. You rock. Thanks for pointing that out. You rock. Listen to Richard. He's so clever.
His name's Richard Noling. He knows. Like it's
knows.
The name. But what's interesting is that there are notes about how the different Skaven clans argue what Morslib is made out of. Like they understand that it's very important to them, but they have surprising arguments about what it could be. And this is, of course, where like the really hilarious meme comes from, where there are Skaven that genuinely believe it's green cheese. Like they're like, it's a joke, but it's implied that there are Skaven clans that seem to genuinely hold that opinion.
Yeah, this kind of came from Empire in Flames. This is a book for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the first edition, where the Emperor makes comment about the green cheese and the Moon Men and the Skaven that are living on the moon. And there is a reason for it in that particular adventure, because he's going proper crazy. But loosely, we know that the moon is mostly Warpstone. And the next question is, have any Skaven got up there? And the answer is, according to the background in a few places, probably yes. There's more than enough suggestion that some have somehow managed to skitter leap their way up there using magic, and have somehow managed, wearing some sort of crazy suit, to survive up there, to mine the fucking stuff, and then get back again. Does it almost certainly end with mighty explosions? Sure, but that's half the fun, isn't it? Skaven are proper mental. So yeah, I do love that as an idea. I think it's proper crazy, but it's well within the standard remit of a crazed Grey Seer to think that they, in their audacity, could somehow get hold of this almost infinite resource of Warpstone, which is at heart the currency of the Skaven. It's basically like a giant gold block in the sky waiting to be mined.
Yeah, I want to say there's a note that like it was a while ago now, but it was like 5 or 6 centuries ago. I think Clan Scryer finally won like the debate on instructions unclear, sent Warpstone meteor hurtling into like button, mutated it into great subscribe button, started a religion around it. Good. The traditional.
Well done on the side. I absolutely approve of this particular mutation of one thing moving to the next. So press like, hit subscribe, do the thing. Thanks.
What's interesting is that Quen was the ones that eventually really figured out and like proved that the moon was made of warpstone. They finally, through some version of the Skaven scientific method, which I'm sure is much more deadly than our version of the scientific method, came to that conclusion, felt confident about it. And ever since then, there has been an obsession among the Skaven with trying to find a way to harvest the moon. Because if they could get their greedy little paws on that much warpstone, surely at long last they would dominate all things. Even though knowing the Skaven, they would probably just kill themselves if they were given that much power.
Well, that would be one hell of a bang.
Yeah. And of course, we do see this finally realized in the end times, where they do finally destroy the moon or harvest it by destroying it. Now, there are several different methods.
Made a bit of a mistake with that, though.
Yes, they did. There are several different methods the Skaven prior to the end times have attempted to deal with the moon. There have been attempts using rituals to pull the moon in closer. There have been attempts to shoot something at the moon that would blow off a piece of it, or maybe blow up the whole thing. And like Annie said, there have even been attempts to go to the moon, either Clan Scryer or different clans building literally rocket ships or using magic to like teleport somebody up there.
Yeah.
And it's very strongly implied that some of these were at least successful in some way, shape, or fashion. Of that, they made a device that did hit and break off a piece of the moon, or they did manage to teleport someone up there to mine bit of it and come back, or they did manage to pull it a little closer one time. And they have this real back and forth relationship. And as the Skaven have grown more advanced, they ended up kind of becoming the opponents of the Lizardmen, in the sense that the Skaven were constantly trying to bring the moon in and the Lizardmen were trying to push the moon away. And we see this finally culminate in the end times, where there's literally a big magic duel between the entirety, all 169 of the Grey Seers and a bunch of Vermin Lords versus the Slann, where the Grey Seers and all of them are trying to pull the moon to the planet and the Slann are trying to push it away. And it's this huge fight that ends with the Slann winning, but they all get comatose afterwards because it was such an effort. And a bunch of shenanigans happen. And that actually screws over the Grey Seer clan, because they also overexerted themselves trying to pull off this ritual. And then in the end times, we see Ikit Claw makes a tractor beam, which is a device that's in Total War. I think he was working on that before the end times.
Yeah,
but
he was.
He makes a functioning tractor beam to try and pull in the moon, which seems to work, but not as well as he would like. And then there is a different Skaven who ends up basically making a doom rocket on cocaine that is what finally explodes the moon. Which there is one of my favorite notes is there's actually a hilarious note about when the moon explodes, where there's a moment where I want to say it's Lord Mazdamundi's point of view, but there's a moment where one of the Slann makes a comment along the lines of like, the dark gods were super like, yeah, like the Skaven are finally like, they're doing our bidding. They're going to help us win the war. And then the Slann says something along the lines of that. Truly, the Chaos Gods are idiots and mad because they didn't realize that the Skaven doing this, unless the Slann get involved, it wouldn't be Chaos wins and takes over the world. It's just the world dies. Like the world just obliterates.
Which I think to a degree the Ruinous Powers are after anyway. They won.
Yeah, but it's such a funny note of being something along the lines of like the Dark Gods are like trying to like the Skaven, but the Slann feel very strongly that the Chaos Gods underestimate the Skaven and don't understand that the Skaven are as dangerous to them as they are to everybody else, which is just funny to me. But yeah, so the Skaven have always been the race that it's like where the Beastmen tend to see Morslib as more of like a deific figure, something to worship. The goblins or the greenskins see as something more to be feared and respected in a sense. The Skaven are the ones who are batshit crazy enough to see it as a resource, despite
I'd say they're all of the above to a degree. Because the Skaven that are on the lower side, on the lower echelons, they have literally no idea about Warpstone, gigantic things up in the sky. That's really very much the engineers and the Grey Seers. Your average Skaven is nothing more than a representation of the Horned Rat. And as you move up through the echelons of knowledge, you realize that that representation is nothing more than a representation of the power of the Horned Rat. What is their core substance? Warpstone, pure magic. That is the source of it. And there's a reason that the entire religion is focused around that. It's because it is the way to ruin the entire world and bring it to the heels of the Skaven. And it's just different layers of society in Skaven society, so to speak, will have different views as to exactly what it represents, where those who are at the very top will be seeing it as it pretty much is, a gigantic bit of warpstone. The thing I find most interesting from the end times is the fact that the very nature of the moon itself should have almost baroque anything you attempted to put up there, because it's pure warpstone. It warps and changes everything. It's not just going to mutate people, it's going to mutate anything that comes close to it. You put a bomb beside that thing, that bomb's going to be a whale or a petunia or something else. Okay, next week, who knows? It's going to be twisting and warping into a variety of things. So it also speaks to how the Skaven must have understood this come the end times, and whatever they built was purposed to be strongly anti-magical, almost certainly built out of obsidian, lead, and various other substances to try and ensure that they could actually bring about the end that they were looking for. Has the Loremaster of Sotek just paused over there? Have I paused as well? If the chat could tell me if I can still be heard. At the moment, he looks like he's looking at the screen and not doing that much else. Is that the case for everyone else? I'm waiting for the comments to catch up with the live stream. Can I be seen? Can I be heard? Oh, Andy is good. Excellent. I'm not frozen. It's coming in. Woohoo! The stream is mine. I've taken over his channel. Yes, yes. It is my time to rule. That being the case, given that we have no Sotek for the moment, I do have access to Sotek. I'm all, look at me. I'm huge. Ooh, I'm turned into Morrslieb. So I'm going to take this exciting moment to dive into Sotek's channel and see if he returns. Oh, here he is. He's back.
StreamYards is not liking my internet today.
No, it really isn't, is it? So do you want to dive into the questions so we can start taking all the questions? That seems to be
sure. We can do that.
A really nice cutoff point there. Perfect. And there was me thinking I could take over your entire channel and do whatever I wanted. I'm so disappointed.
You know what? If you want to, you can have fun with it. It totally isn't a horribly stressful thing sometimes. All right. So, wow, we have a ton of questions about Morslib.
Okay, I'm sure we can get through these pretty easily because most of them, I imagine, are very much, it's Warpstone. Yes, people worship it. The end.
Yeah. All right. So, first question from Scythe Petals. The Nehekarans worship Neru, a moon goddess linked to Morslib. Do they have a deity tied to Morslib?
Yes, they absolutely do. So up there is obviously Morslib, and the Nehekarans view Morslib as the green moon. I imagine they've got some funky Nehekaran version of how they answer that. And particularly, though, I can't remember which book it was in. Doesn't really matter. One of the concubines of Sekhmet. Her name is... Sekhmet. No, it's the concubine of Petra. I'm getting my head mixed up. It's the real god. So her name's Sekhmet. And she's a concubine to Petra, and she is seen as a crazy green witch. She is a lunatic, using again that sensation of madness going hand in hand with the green moon that sits in the sky, because when it goes full, it makes people go mad down on the ground. So this scheming concubine of Petra, who's very much trying to get in between Petra and the real wife, is their goddess for this, and is perceived as chasing the main moon around the world and trying to kick it out so that it can become ascendant in the sky. And then when it becomes ascendant, it will then be able to go back over to the sun and go, "You are mine! Yes, finally!" As
that's totally how that would go down.
As myths go, it's pretty much classic for how people who are on the ground are trying to make sense of the heavens. Particularly given you've got yourself this bizarre meandering moon that's changing in size and dominance, and occasionally dominating the other moon, but never really being able to do anything to Morslib, meaning that it's always on the outside, which is, I imagine, where Sekhmet gets her particular green witch vengeful character from. I can't remember which book that was in. It's really annoying. It's definitely in there though, because it's in my head.
I know it's mentioned in I want to say the 8th edition Tomb King's Army book.
It
doesn't go that well in depth. That might be one of the older books.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, that's really annoying that I can't remember, but I do know that one. So there you
go. Let's see. Can you discuss the potential implications / conflicts of Moonclaw, who fell from Morslib, and the Moon Empress? Yeah, we talked about that. They would definitely be very opposed forces. I think if Total War ever decided to put Moonclaw in the game, making him the Beastmen character in Cathay would be a lot of fun. If he's technically he's in the Empire, but I think he would do great as a Cathayan villain.
Yeah, I would move Moonclaw from the Empire over the mountains. I'd build a nice little short story about that journey and the faction that he builds up with him, and then unleash that upon Cathay, because that would make a great story.
Yep. Let's see. Are all the good, quote unquote, good moon entities tied to Morslib like Neru and Lilith? And if so, what does that mean for Morslib?
I think it's pretty much explained by the very question.
Yeah. The answer is yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most cultures, if they bother with a moon god, they usually are like good god, bad god. pretty straightforward.
Yeah, pretty much. And there is a lot of connection to a variety of good things or gods or goddesses to Morrslieb. And they also interestingly skip across the genders, in that they both have male aspects and feminine aspects, where Morslib is generally always almost genderless, in that it's always something that is viewed as the thing of that thing. Very few gods are directly associated with it, which is, strictly speaking, really weird, because you'd think loads of them would be. Anything bad and nasty you think would be tied to Morslib, which suggests that the underlying knowledge is that it stands outside the god's plan, so to speak.
Yep. And I will note that in a lot of the cultures that tend to not necessarily view Morslib in a deific sense, it's usually because Morslib will get locked in with the sea god. So like the moons are more seen as a aspect of the ocean, as opposed to being their own separate thing. Yeah. Grandmaster Eldrin, what are the other races / cultures relationship with Morslib? What are their names for it? Are there characters other than Moonclaw who are tied very heavily to the moon?
Okay, so let's see if I can remember any.
Yeah, so we've talked about pretty much all the other cultures and races. Generally speaking, most races
even call it Morrslieb. That I remember. Morrslieb for the Skaven. Let's see, Northmen. So we've already mentioned Gyronek. That's the Northmen tribes. Then you go normal chaos people and the Norse. They generally refer to it as the Chaos Moon, as do the Lizardmen, although they use their own words for that, because it's brought into a closed system. It was a closed system with its perfect plan. The Chaos Moon comes in. Other than that, Morrslieb, Chaos. You obviously got Morrslieb for the Empire, and in fact, most of the old world use Beloved of Mor. There's I can't remember the dwarf name for it. They do have a name for it. God dang it.
Yeah, I was trying to look it up earlier, but like I
can't remember. That's really
struggling to find the passage.
I wrote an article for this for the Tome of Salvation, so I wrote the bit about how
that might be where it is. That might actually be where it is.
So it wouldn't surprise me if it's sitting inside the cosmology sections inside the Wikipedia online somewhere. So if anyone's out there and wanting to go look it up, you might find it in there, because I definitely wrote about it.
Yeah, because I think it's the Tome of Salvation has a segment that talks about like how the elves, what they call it and feel about it, what the dwarves call and feel about it. But yeah, most races would have their own name for it. You know, greenskins call it the Bad Moon if that's the moon they're talking about. But probably. Probably, but depends on the tribe. Moving on.
We've had another pause. I'm going to presume that I'm still going, so I'm going to bring up the. Oh no, you back?
Yeah, this is annoying. I want to say it's pretty much just Moonclaw. I don't think anyone else.
I didn't hear the question. You'll need to.
Is any other characters tied strongly to Morslib?
It's pretty much just Moonclaw, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe so. No, the Cathayans would not call it Morslib. They would call it something else. But we don't know what the word is that the Cathayans use for the moon, like the actual moon. Like Quen is not the moon; she's just from the moon.
Yeah. Okay, cool. What's next?
Let's see. Grandmaster Eldrin, what could be the potential ramifications for destroying the moon, excluding what happened in the end times? It would be a probably borderline apocalyptic event. Unless
massively apocalyptic.
Unless
you're talking end of the world, unless they somehow get it to go away.
Yeah, and unless you can make it leave the atmosphere, you're talking about like warpstone asteroids that could easily obliterate the planet. Like it would be game over.
Yeah, it would.
Like the end times had a lot of bad stuff, but like the parts dealing with the moon and like what would happen was pretty accurate. Let's see. Scythe petals. How frequently do warpstone meteors drop from Morslib?
At the speed of plot.
Yeah. Sometimes it's like once a century. Sometimes it's like a whole bunch of times in a decade. Sometimes it's once every 1,000 years. It depends.
Yeah. So there is a general answer, and that's that the Lizardmen are fucking with that moon, trying to bounce it away like it's some sort of breakout game. On the other side, the Skaven are making various attempts to pull it in. Then you have other forces in the world who are doing whatever the fuck they're doing. Who knows? Every time that moon is screwed with one fashion or another, it drops stuff. Some of that stuff will come directly down to the world. Some of it will move into orbit, meaning that occasionally it might take as much as 10, 15, 20, or even a century or so before that orbiting piece eventually hits the atmosphere and comes scudding down towards the Earth. Unlike standard meteorites, Warpstone is surrounded and emitting magic. It's much less likely to be burned up by the heat when it comes in. Having said that, though, heat is often the most common way that the Empire, for example, tries to remove infestations of Dar and Taint and Warpstone in general. So it will get destroyed to a degree, and then green streaks through the sky, down come the tears of Morr. There is no consistent answer to that. There is no it happens so many years or any equivalent, because it's as inconsistent as the interactions with the moon and the potential of the moon spitting itself as well, which may not involve any interaction from any outside force. So that's that. Has Loremaster decided to freeze up while I'm talking again? That being the case, I can move on. Is the bad moon just Morrslieb? Oh, hiya, you're back.
Yes.
Or is it something different in green skin eyes? I think we covered that quite extensively earlier during the stream. Yep. And hey, Ivan, thank you very much. You rock. We love you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I apologize that my internet is being a bitch today, but it just happens.
It happens sometimes.
Let's see. Jack of Ripper. What would happen to a person if they were born on the one night Morslib can be seen in its full glory in the middle of the sky? What would happen to them? What would the community do to them? Okay, that's actually a more interesting question that we actually didn't. Oh man, that's like a whole subject.
It really is, isn't it?
I haven't touched on all of a sudden. So that's actually worth diving into for a minute. In that, so if Morslib can have a very dramatic effect on a lot of different things. People born when Morslib is full, usually it's not good.
Yeah, there's a star sign for it, the Witchling Star. And there's a reason it's called that, because those born under full Morrslieb are potentially in trouble. They're very likely to be witches later in life. Doesn't mean they will be, but they're very likely to be so. What will it mean to the local community? Trust me, if that baby's born clean, everyone's going to pretty much defend their own child. There is absolutely no doubt in the vast majority of communities, it would be nothing. There would be no further. It would just be the child born while everyone's doing their Hexenstag or Geheimnisnacht celebrations behind closed doors in the dark. It's not something that I think on a community basis for the majority of species across the Warhammer world would be done, would be granted any significant importance. However, it's exactly the sort of thing that saying Skaven society would bring about, say, the birth of a white furred child. You'd almost expect a white furred rat to be born on Geheimnisnacht when good old Morslib is fooling up in the sky. Each species
horn nubs.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Little horn nubs, because we've got ourselves a Grey Seer in the making right there. So each society will have its own things, but generally when people ask that question, they're loosely saying what happens in the Empire, because it's the society that most people start from, and the answer is in most cases nothing. It's just another night, but it's a night of great concern. But if a child is born, then so be it. Some might pretend it wasn't born that night, or it was born the day before, because hey, everyone's behind their closed doors. Who's to say?
Yeah, and there is a non-insignificant chance that the child can be born a mutant, which that does not usually end well. Normally, those will end up being Gave spawn, which are children that are handed over to the Beastmen. Because they're left out in the forest, because nobody wants to kill a baby, because that, you know, they're still human, and killing a baby, even if it's mutated, is like really awful.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's also worth saying that as ridiculous as this is going to sound, there is an empirical fact here that we can deal with. If you're born underneath that baleful green light in the sky, there's a high chance of mutation. That means that there are going to be people who will notice this and scientifically go, this is a problem we need to deal with, which means those with money and those in influence are going to respond to this, which means that you're going to probably almost certainly find that there's going to be certain rules put in place for some families who become aware of this to never walk outside in Morslib's light if you're pregnant, ever. There will almost certainly be birthing chambers in some places that have sheets of obsidian laced into their roofings, that have lead attached into all of their building materials at the top to try and ensure that that green light cannot influence the children, particularly for important imperial families, for example. They'll be doing whatever they can to try and protect their legacy, their children, and ensure that mutation doesn't happen. So the whole point of that little aside is that if you're in a world where all of these things can be discovered, if you're role-playing in this world, try and think about what that means when your characters discover it. What would they do? And more importantly, if you're a GM, what have others done already? Because people aren't stupid. Once they notice that a thing happens, they will do things to mitigate it. And indeed, in many respects, the dwarves have done the cleverest thing by drilling themselves deep underground. It would, for example, suggest some societies would always have their birthings underground, where hopefully the light of Morslib, would not affect the potential birth to come. So there's all sorts of fun things you could do for cultural impact for the very different way that the real world manifests in comparison to the Warhammer world. So if you are out there GMing your own games or playing in your own games, think it through and do stuff that's really cool and fun for your game.
Yeah, I would even go so far as to say you'd potentially see circumstances like poorer communities or wealthy communities, if they could find them, calling upon like priestesses of Shalia or Raya to come and either do a rite to try and make the baby come early or make the baby come later so that it's not born on the night. Or, but yeah, like there's actually, I know there are some books that have gone specifically into detail of like pregnant mothers. There's a whole, they just don't go into Morslib's light at all. That's considered like you're risking, like, unless the house is burning down and you will die unless you go out into that light, you do not go out into the light if you're pregnant.
I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? It's a little bit like in modern times, the strong stress not to smoke, not to drink when you're pregnant. And you're going to find that there will be similar restrictions. Be aware, though, that society is often mean and horrible, and some people will try to use those to restrict and control people as well. So, you know, if you're looking for a dark and grim world and not just a world that's reflective of the environment in which it's in, try to think about those things too, but only if you want to, because that can go to some pretty horrible places if you're taking it to its fruition.
Yeah. Make sure to check in with your players.
Check in with your players. Make sure you're all cool with that, because that's pretty horrific.
Yep. Let's see. Scythe petals. How much Warpstone harvested straight from Morslib would I have to pay to get Bretonia on the list for an episode in the near future? I'll tell you what, if you manage...
I've never heard of Bretonia, so I don't know what you're talking about.
Tell you what, if you find a way to harvest Morslib, don't contact us ever, because you are clearly about to go through some horrible stuff. We don't want to talk to you.
Good answer.
Actually, I think this is kind of an interesting question. For you, Andy, are there any underground human communities that you can think of off the top of your head? And I can think of one, though they're not underground anymore, which is that in the Sigmar trilogy, it talks about that the Asaborns had an underground community, but
yeah, and they came out. They're interesting. I didn't actually tie that through to the other legend. I've just had a thought, but that's by the by. Yes is the answer, but no is also the answer. And by that, I mean, it's not something, because Games Workshop have been very focused on trying to ensure that each of their individual species, factions, cultures have got their own unique identity. When something becomes a core part of an identity to one of those species, they tend to stop all other species from doing it. So, for example, the dwarfs are their underground people. They have a variety of things that potentially are related to it, even if we look at things like the gnomes. But generally speaking, if you move to another species that's the good guy species, they avoid that and they will look for different key traits. The same sort of goes with bad guys, but again, the bad guys are generally pitched against the species. So, for example, orcs pitched against dwarves, so they're underground. Oh, no, let's just make it the goblins. Let's now have a look at the Skaven. They're underground because they're also pitched against, and you tend to find that it's often correlation to another species that defines them, allows them to be the bad guy species that come squirreling up from underground. So are there human societies that do this? And not just yes, Hell yes, all over the place. There's going to be a variety of them. Those that are following dwarven traditions, those who've perhaps moved into mines that were once vacated by dwarves. The world is huge. Are there entire civilizations that are based upon this? Not yet. But if you look to the real world version and look at some of the craziness that they got down in Turkey, there's some really cool stuff down that there. I'm not going to pronounce the names. I'll pronounce it wrong. It's pronounced sort of like K Mackley and similar. But there's some massive underground cities down there that used to populate tens of thousands of people underground. Would Warhammer uplift that and drop it down into the Border Princes somewhere or in that area for an ancient civilization? Yes.
Yeah, I know in the Border Prince book, the Badlanders, a lot of Badlander communities live underground. Like they live in like chasms or crevasses where they've built into the hills or into the walls. That way they can get away from the greenskins that are along the surface and stuff.
And all of that. So yes, you're going to get loads of individual communities. They've yet to create an entire human civilization that's built upon it. But I think the likelihood of it, if they ever reach the point where they go, it's about time now that we start detailing other parts of the world rather than just the Empire, that they will do that.
That's a cool question. Do the colleges of Magic and Altdorf ever try their best to bend Morslib's light away from Altdorf when Geheimnisnacht comes?
I think that's a little bit like asking them to bend a tide, in that perhaps in a very small local amount they could give it a go, but they'll probably fail.
I think they'd be more about using protective materials as opposed to like, especially because using magic to deal with Morslib is kind of it's like using fire to fight fire. It's very difficult.
I mean, you can make an entire city cold on a hot summer's day, but that doesn't stop the sun beating down on you. It's still up there. And the moon is going to be constantly beating down. Now, I think that this is a really complicated question, actually. It's so complicated, it's just become a mighty point of concern in my campaign, and my players don't realize how much of a concern it is. Because ultimately, you're saying, what is magic? And Warpstone is magic. Morrslieb is magic. It's not evil. It's just magic. It's all wrapped up into the whole thing. And Morslib is too much magic coming down at once, so to speak. And when Geheimnisnacht comes, that too much magic causes effects, and you have to protect yourself from it. But if you're a wizard, it's a night where you can do all manner of great, massive deeds because there's so much magic in the air. But because there's so much, it makes it more likely for things to go wrong. So I think the correct answer to this one would be, would they try and stop it? They might consider it as a theoretical question, particularly in the Light College. Have they successfully done it yet? Possibly they have, perhaps with some prismatic Light College diffuse thing, maybe once or twice. But because there's so much magic kicking about, it's going to blow up. It's probably going to go wrong. And that suggests something that's happened in the last 200 years that's yet to be popped into the timeline, which is the Light College tries to hold off Geheimnisnacht, and one of their pyramids blows up, loads of wizards dies. Oops, let's not try that again, which is probably the real answer. They've tried, and they've failed.
Yeah, honestly, I wouldn't have put it past the Light College to try and create something that like absorbs magic, thinking that might deflect it, and then it absorbs too much and explodes.
Yeah, because it's just constantly coming down. It's just this constant irradiation. It's a really complicated question, and much more complicated than a simple question at the end of our stream can quickly drill into. There's so much here we could discuss.
Yeah, great question though. Yeah,
a beautiful question. Love it.
Let's see. Oh man, I'm not even going to try and pronounce your name. Yes, I will. Svalsmarkgraf von Graugrissen. There we go. Close enough.
Svalsmarkgraf, yeah.
Is Morslib responsible for all the Warpstone meteors and meteor showers, thus responsible for the fate of Mordheim? I would say it is. I would say it is not responsible for all of them. There is a lot of suggestion that when Chaos initially came in, Morslib was the biggest chunk of Warpstone, but there was like a massive amount that are just hanging out in the atmosphere or cycling around the planet, and every once in a while, one of them kind of curves in and falls. So is it all of them? Probably not. There's probably much smaller chunks of Warpstone out in the atmosphere or space. But is it responsible for a lot of the really big important ones? Yeah, generally.
I'm the other way now. I'll also add a couple of let's say difficulties to this whole process. During the conversation behind the Realms of Sorcery 2nd edition book for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, there was a massive argument behind the scenes concerning Warpstone and its creation. On one hand, you had the concept that Warpstone was the response of It was nothing more than the meteorites that landed on the planet. They all came from Morrslieb, or the original ejection from the poles. So that means, for example, down in the southern pole, all the warpstone found down there came from the southern pole. The same for the northern pole, and everything that comes showering down onto the Warhammer world was either original ejecta or it came from Morrslieb. But there was a second one and a second argument, which was very much driven by the author, Marianne von Stauffer, where there was many examples of where Dar, when it became stagnant, when it drew together and was never resolved, so much magic suffused in that area would eventually solidify and create new pockets of warpstone. And a slight split was here created between Dar and True Dar in an attempt to try and justify what the Dark Elves did, and similar. So by the end of that book, there was the concept that warpstone could also magically create itself, but it created a host of issues. Because, for example, Nagaroth is absolutely suffused with dark magics. Completely. As is, for example, if we go down to Sylvania, that place becomes a bit of a hellhole and a mess with how much dark magics there are. And if that's the case, it should also be suffused with warpstone, because it would start gathering anywhere where this magic was not properly channeled away. And an answer was not provided for why that wasn't the case, because it isn't. It expressly isn't. You don't wander into Sylvania and then suddenly find warpstone everywhere. That's not the sort of corruption that it's currently cast under. It's quite different when the good old undead lands. So there is an issue here that needs to be resolved, and I don't think anywhere has properly resolved it yet. But the answer, and I know this is a long answer for a very simple question, is the vast majority of it comes from Morrslieb and the ejecta from the poles. But there are lots of ways that it could potentially be created. And I have one last thing to say on that. If that is the case, then the Skaven are definitely running warpstone farms.
Yeah, that's actually what I was about to say, is that...
Which is an issue.
Yeah, I would say that I kind of struggle with the idea that you can create warpstone nowadays, because if you could, surely vampires and Skaven and Dark Elves would be doing that all over the goddamn place. And that's never been done that we know of.
Yeah, and if it had been done, it would have been a plot point in so many stories. And the amount of dark kicking around all of these locations, it would have turned it into a plot point. So I would generally suggest that no matter the story that's put in place there, that I wouldn't use it except for perhaps outside extreme events, like, for example, an incursion of chaos, when magic has gone properly wild, and then perhaps warpstone does reform in a couple of places. And perhaps it's not simply it forming out of the wild magic. It could be almost reforming from a piece that was once there a long time ago, and it's almost like the seed of it is growing like a crystal. So there was one tiny seed left, and that crystal grows, and a piece of warpstone starts to form in the most unlikely place, like in the Barn Hills or equivalent. So there's a long, complicated answer there. Hey, CB Perrin.
Yeah, so he asked, could the answer to why there are not two Morslibs be that the Southern Gates one was shot further out into space and eventually came back to be thrown at the ogres by Grand Cathay? I would say that's an interesting theory. It's possible. I would say the Great Maw is a little undersized to be a second Morslib. It would probably have been a lot bigger if that was the case.
Yeah. The answer to that is... yeah, possibly, in that it could have been a piece of ejecta that came from the Southern Pole. We don't actually know what happened at the Southern Pole. We have myths for what happened at the Northern Pole.
No one's been down there that recorded it and brought it back.
The South is tough. So I'd say that if you're looking for the most likely option, it would be that it was a large piece of ejecta from one of the two poles that warped around the planet a few times and then skipped into the atmosphere, burned up for however many weeks, looked like a comet for most of that time until eventually it slammed down into the planet. People across the world were probably aware of this event. And as we discussed in our previous stream concerning them all, it's very likely that the outcome was controlled, suppressed by what will become Grand Cathay. But that is nothing more than making sense of a relatively weird event that may have been a planet killer.
Yep. Sage Kinshu's next question says, we know the Empire call it Geheimnisnacht Do the dwarves or elves or Cathayans, etc., have their own names for it? Yes, 100%.
Yes, they do. God,
that is.
Damn it, that's annoying me. I definitely have it here.
It's in the Tome of
Salvation.
Yeah.
And the Tome of Salvation, I definitely wrote it into there. And it's really annoying because I spent ages making sure that I got the Karazhan right.
You know what? How about you answer this next question from the chat in depth while I try and look that up real quick, because
Okay, so the Barren Hills and what goes on there is fascinating situation, because it's actually gone through more than one iteration. It all spans back to the original Enemy Within. The Death on the Reich adventure from the first edition version of it had a pretty prolonged story that was based around what turned the Green Hills, the Grünhügel, into the Barren Hills, an event that occurred around about 100 years ago as more spat and meteorites of Warpstone struck the Green Hills and turned that into what is now known as the Barren Hills. And it fucks with everything. Everything living goes wrong. The entirety of the area becomes almost a desert in the center of the empire as life itself struggles, and what remains of the people there become an absolute mess. But this gets changed and messed around with by multiple different sources over the course of time. One of the biggest changes is that they often forgot that it was only 100 years ago. The number of people who dropped in a little detail like, and for the last so many centuries in the Barren Hills, this occurred. Or so many 100 years ago, this struck the Barren Hills. And you're like, but it wasn't the Barren Hills then. That doesn't make sense within the existing lore. For example, that very clearly marks down when Moonclaw came down within the last 100 years, if you go by that story. And to make matters slightly more confusing, when the most recent edition of the adventure, Death on the Reich, was released, again, 100 years ago was marked as the date when that struck down. So we have all of that. Did you find what you're looking for there?
I am trying, but I
know exactly where it is. If you want to now take over with some additional,
cool. I'll let you do that then, because it's like I forgot how big this fucking book is, and
I know exactly where it is because
All right, so we've got, let's see. Okay, we've already talked about the Skaven. Sword of Sin, could there be life on Morslib? We've covered that. Yes, absolutely, probably, most likely. Probably demons or something similar to Moonclaw. Have any gods attempted to destroy Morslib? That is an interesting question. We've touched on a bit in a sense of that the Lizardmen have tried to destroy it. It's likely that some gods, in a sense, have attempted to destroy it. Of that, so I would say yes, but the way gods interact with the world is often kind of complex. Like Andy talked about earlier, there's the idea that Mor himself may have been directly related to the creation of Morslib, which may have been from an attempt to destroy it that killed him and made him into the god of death. So in the sense of have gods attempt to destroy it, I would say almost certainly yes, but gods are also weird and complicated, and it's sometimes difficult to understand what is something that they actually did themselves versus what is something that was like a natural phenomena that is then attributed to gods. But hopefully that answers that. Servant said, do you think the demigods or lesser gods like Grombrindal would be able to survive on Morslib? That's a complicated question. I think creatures that are more magically focused, like Grombrindal's a really weird case. I don't know if I'd feel confident answering that in particular, because Grombrindal is implied to be more physical than a lot of people think he is, as opposed to like a creature like the Green Knight, right? Or a god. I would say like gods, yeah, they'd be able to live there fine. It's magic. They don't need air. They're etheric entities. All they need is etheric energy. So gods and stuff like that would be fine there. Though they'd probably be battling against unending hordes of nightmares.
Yeah, I cut that section. So it's not in the actual book. I know exactly where it was supposed to be.
I know it's in right
there.
Book.
So the next one will be to go to Stone and Steel, where it's got the details in Stone and Steel for the dwarven parts, but I don't have that book to hand here, sadly. I definitely wrote it, and if I'll for next week, maybe after Gav, because it's Gav next week, isn't it? So yes. For the week after, I'll have it all prepped for you, so I will make sure that I say that.
I got it.
You got it. Perfect.
So it's okay. So it's Geheimnisnacht, which also is known as the Day of Mystery. or the floating holiday in the Empire because of shenanigans. Then you have it's Winter's Eve in Bretonia because they don't use Reichspiel. And then to the elves, the elves call it Twilight's Tide. And then the dwarves call it Ar Uzkul.
Ar Uzkul. Oh, damn it. That's the one I was looking for. So is that a Tome of Salvation?
Let me see where it's attributed from. Yes. It is attributed.
Really?
Yes.
I was in the wrong bit.
page 145 of the Tome of Salvation.
I hang my head in freaking shame. Right. Let's pretend that never happened. So I'm going to drop
the part I was looking for is in the Demons book. Okay, the Demons of Chaos 8th edition book talks about how all the different races of the world handle it. Demons. I was looking at vampire accounts. I was in the wrong book.
Yeah, I was in the Warriors of Chaos book. God damn it. So many bloody books. Right, so that all aside, we were discussing gods. Could they live up in Morrslieb? I think that the answer to that is probably the thing is so suffused with demons and other entities that no god would survive for very long up there. So no god would want to go up there.
Yeah.
That I think
breathe.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, they're gods, but they're not going to be coming into the physical realm for a variety of reasons, many of which are contradictory, almost all of which span back to the myths that the elves have. So yeah.
All right, next question. Could the Bad Moon of Age of Sigmar be tied to Morslib still? Okay, so this is actually a really interesting question in that in Age of Sigmar, obviously Morslib is not a thing. However, it has survived because Games Workshop kind of pulled a thing where if there was anything in fantasy they genuinely deeply loved, they just copy pasted it straight into Age OS because why not? One of these things is Morslib, which is now purely known as the Bad Moon. It's basically the same. It's just no longer chaos associated. And it's no longer made of Warpstone. Instead, the way they rewrote the story is that it is a goofy, erratic celestial object that still emits a green light that causes madness, but now it causes a very specific form of moon madness that is associated with the goblins, where it causes you to get that goblin madness that causes like the different kinds of crazy goblins. And it also causes mushrooms and fungal things to just start sprouting like crazy, to the point that if you're a person and you're caught in the Bad Moon's light, you will have fungus and mushrooms literally start growing out of your flesh on top of it fucking with your brain. It's horrifying.
Sounds pretty rubbish.
Yeah, it's actually weirdly enough, it's actually significantly more dangerous than Morslib is to the typical passerby. But it's very heavily associated specifically with the goblins. And it is their deity. Like they full on worship it, and they have their own beliefs about what it is. Where your Moon Clan Grots, which are your night goblins, just think it's the Bad Moon. And their whole thing is that Skragrot, the Loon King, who's their big special character, he's basically Skarsnik. He is obsessed with talking to the Bad Moon, and it did talk to him once. And his whole thing is that he is a wizard that tries to predict where it's going to show up. And he goes there and he unleashes a big army, and they take over wherever the Bad Moon shows up. And it erratically flies around all the different realms, and it is crazy. It doesn't follow any set path. And it's bonkers, and it just shows up having a good time, and it spits meteors at people on a regular basis.
Of course it does. I'll actually take one of those details and say that it can be applied straight back, because it's very easy, particularly because we all call it the Chaos Moon, to associate Morrslieb with chaos. But if you look at it strictly speaking, it's not. It's nothing more than a hunk of Warpstone. And a hunk of Warpstone is not necessarily chaos. Now, was it created by the arguably chaos-inflicted catastrophe? Yes. It came from that era. Is it magic? Yes. Is magic pure chaos? No. Magic is used by chaos. You could argue that Tzeentch is the god of magic, but that doesn't mean that the magic comes from Tzeentch. It's that Tzeentch is using magic, because it'd be like saying that slaughter comes from corn. It doesn't. Blood doesn't come from corn either. They are just focused on its use. And
Tzeentch is funny enough to argue that. He's like, magic is me.
But, yeah, indeed. And Tzeentch is so multi-headed, has no real core intellect to speak of in the same way that the other gods do, while simultaneously having one, that it's such a mess. But at its heart, it's not really a chaos moon with a large C. It's a chaos moon with a small c, in that it brings chaos.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say about the Bad Moon VOS, just to kind of talk it out, is that instead of being created as a hunk of warpstone, instead it was a big celestial moon that Gorka Morka saw, and he tried to take a big bite out of it. And the way the greenskin or destruction gods work in AOS is all of them are things that had an interaction with Gorka Morka and either in some way wounded him. And by wounding him, he poured some of his power into them and they became deities. So like the spider god was literally a horrifying giant spider that bit Gorka Morka and like absorbed some of his energy by biting him and became a god. The Bad Moon is literally a moon that Gorka Morka tried to take a bite out of, and I think he broke some of his teeth on it, and it absorbed some of that power and became this crazy erratic thing. But that's the interaction of the destruction gods, is that they're all kind of subsidiaries of Gorka Morka because he's the overall big god of beasts. So they're all kind of like spawned from him in a sense, and that's what the moon is. Though my favorite iteration is that, and I think this may be the case in fantasy, but I'm not sure, is that the spider goblins in Age of Sigmar believe that the Bad Moon is literally just a giant spider egg, and that eventually it will hatch and cover the world in a tidal wave of spiders, which is fucking terrifying.
Hate spiders, so yeah, burn it with fire.
Yeah. Anyway, next question. If we sent Gelt to Morslib as it was destroyed, would that be a fitting punishment for him? Sorry, I had to.
No, that's not a bad enough end.
Dear Lord, Andy. Morslib versus the Great Maw. Let them fight. Yeah, that would be an interesting kaiju battle.
I remember this actually bizarrely being brought up when someone was trying to do that. Hey, if 40k invaded the Warhammer world, 40k would have it easy. To which Morslib, interestingly, was one of the first. You do realize there's a giant demon infested moon just wandering around that would pretty much wipe out anything that came close to it, and they'd all want to come close to it because of what it represented. But yeah, not really the sort of thing that comes into your standard fight.
Yeah. The great
no, not the bees.
Now, if you want a much more disturbing imagery on your head, I will say, because we know the Chaos Moon has, or the Morslib has a tongue, theoretically the Great Maw Morslib could make out.
Well, that's something I didn't need to think about.
Side pedals. Why aren't the Skaven a chaos race in Andy's eyes when they are big fans of the Chaos Moon? I would say
I think I just clarified that.
He just gave a whole speech about why that's the case. It's just
magic. Totally.
Let's see. What's the relation? We already did with that. How does Morslib affect the winds of magic? I think the best allusion to it is that it billows them out. You can kind of think of it as like how the regular moon affects the ocean in our world is very similar to how Morslib affects winds of magic in their world.
Yeah. I'll give an example of that. Right before I resigned from being the producer of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, I'd commissioned a piece of art which was a very old school medieval style image of Morrslieb blowing down onto the world and blowing the winds of magic in a great swirling churn. And I think that's how many would perceive it as that moon grows closer to the planet, the winds of magic rise, and they'll perceive it as almost the moon going and blowing down onto the world. And that's a fun way to try and imagine it.
Yep. Let's see. Crowtier, Van Guy's backstory claims that he sailed the seas of Morslib. Is it mentioned anywhere else that there are oceans on Morslib? That is, I don't think it's mentioned anywhere else. I believe that's exclusive to Dreadfleet.
But I really love it as a detail, particularly because it gives you a difference between what happens with that ship when it's down, the Shade Wraith in particular, down there. The Shade Wraith also has that. When they're down in the world and the Shade Wraith is refused access to the water by Manan, one of the reasons why it floats, because it's so cursed. And then you bring that up. Did we not bring that one up earlier?
No, we did not.
That's what I was busy looking.
Finish your statement, and then we'll talk about
but when it goes up to Morrslieb, apparently because it actually sails on the sea itself because Manan is not involved up there. And I thought that was a really nice little difference between how it interacts with the real world and whatever the etheric reflection of Morrslieb is up there. Just on a final point, if you did somehow find yourself up there, I think the chance of it being anything close to reality like we understand it down on the Warhammer world is next to none. Reality will have fractured up there, as we can see by the many faces that pop up on that moon.
Yeah, it would literally be the realm of chaos. Like, it would just literally anything would be possible. Are there oceans? Sure. Are there realms made of lava? Sure. Are there realms made of bees? Sure, why not?
Which means it almost certainly is inhabited to some degree.
Yeah. Kabanda, on the maps. Oh, this is a great question. On the maps of the Realm of Chaos, there is the Bad Moon in the Realm of Chaos. Is this merely a reflection of Morslib or the real thing? Also, there is Argus, the Plague Moon, and the Frozen Moons within the Realm of Chaos. What are they? That is a really fun question. So I would say yes and no and yes and no. Because the Realm of Chaos is a fucking madhouse.
Yeah, I think that I can feel an entire speech coming on. Yeah. I think this one is better handled in a the Realm of Chaos stream, because there is a lot to cover in terms of how that could be manifested.
Yeah, for anyone that wants to, you got the Bad Moon right there. You can see the little
right there. And the nature of what is in the Realm of Chaos and the reflection of how that moves up to, say, Morrslieb, I think is probably discreet, but and I think the long explanation for the but would be an entire stream by itself. So I think that's probably best us leaving to later, but I would loosely say that there is an association with a great deal of chaos worship with Morrslieb because it was created at the same point as they started their war. It is a key component to their understanding of the end. And indeed, as we know, the end times are almost heralded by bringing down Morrslieb from the heavens. It is basically one huge cycle. When Morrslieb finally falls, the world comes to an end and chaos wins. So there's going to be a host of stuff that we can drill into on that, but that's another stream.
Yeah, that will be a stream. Like, there's so many arguments that could be made for, like, is everything in the Realm of Chaos like an actual thing, or is it just like, if someone's worshiping it, does that mean it can appear in the Realm of Chaos? Like, is the Bad Moon the Realm of Chaos? That is that what the goblins might interpret the moon as? But that, like, it's a whole thing. Magic. I will say, though, Argus, the Plague Moon, does actually have a story behind it, in that it is actually the skull of a Sky Titan. Fun fact. That is all full of disease and stuff. Let's see. Regaldo. This is a great question. How does Morslib interact with the lycanthropes of the Warhammer world? Does it have a certain effect on them?
Yeah.
Generally, yes, but it also depends.
Yeah, there's a problem with lycanthropes. In fact, there's a big problem with lycanthropes because Games Workshop themselves don't really know what they want to do with them, because they've got various types, whether it's their skin changers, whether it's chaos mutants, whether it's just a standard werewolf et al, werecat or whatever, to the point that when we were discussing with them about how to include one of the older adventures from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1, it was expressly stated, you know what, I don't think there's a single were creature at all in the Warhammer world, to which I responded with a fairly clear, but there are.
Bullshit.
But there are, and laid out a variety of them that were from a variety of still canon books. And by that, I mean books that Games Workshop themselves put forward as examples of what their current world state was. I was halfway through that argument when I resigned. When the book came out, their way of resolving that half argument apparently was they put the adventure in place and put a little box in and said, you know what? Back in the past, there was these things. They're not really things anymore. Bye! And ran. So they really didn't deal with the situation. So the bigger question is, would it be tied to Morrslieb? Morrslieb is about mutation and lunacy. So mutation in terms of the physical mutation for being under its light, that's change. And also the mental mutation that comes from its light, that's also change. So the answer is yes, but it's also tied to Manslieb. There's a host of stories, particularly when you're in the older versions of Warhammer, where it's Manslieb that causes the change, not Morrslieb. So I think the answer is it's complicated and it depends upon what sort of, let's call them lycanthropes for want of a better overall umbrella term, what sort, what breed, what type you are. Some will respond to one thing, some will respond to another thing, and it will depend upon how each one is written at that point.
Yeah, and I just because we're actually doing quite well on time, I'll just give a very quick thing of like off the top of my head, I can think of like 4 different kinds of skin changers, in the sense that you have your skin wolves, which a lot of people think skin wolves are just regular werewolves. They're not. It's a blood curse. Like it is passed by through descendants. And they are often, they can change through a ritual. A ritual has to be performed that causes that inner monster to rip out of them. There are then like your children of Ulrich, which are people that can change willingly. They can manifest the change through sheer willpower, and they can turn into sometimes more than one form. If you actually play Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition, there's a character you can meet in Ubersreich who can turn into just a big dog, or he can turn into an actual werewolf type guy. There's also a specific mutation for wares. There is a mutation. Now, the mutation form is usually the Morslib version. Like that is usually the version where if the Chaos Moon is out, they will transform whether they want to or not. It's usually the Chaos mutation. And then there is the final form, which are just full-on shapeshifters, which are usually more specifically tied to Manslib. Quen is one of these. She can shapeshift at will. She's from Manslib. There is a direct connection there. So there's and that's not all of them. That's just 4 general categories.
And that was the general conversation that I was having at the time, particularly because by the time we were having this conversation with Games Workshop, Ubersreich, for example, had already been released, and there was a character in there that was effectively like an Alfleraner, a wolf child, so to speak. And yeah, it's complicated is the answer.
And like Andy said, like I know of a Black Library novel where there's a character that shapeshifts with Manslib. So like when there's a full regular moon, he transforms. Nice. And not all of them are lycanthropes. Like there are people that turn into cats or dogs or weird things that defy description. Like go crazy with it, have fun. Let's see. That being said, if you are someone that is affected by change and Morslib comes out, whatever change you are going to be affected by is either probably going to be harder to resist, or it's going to be more dramatic, more powerful. Like it will. The best way I think about Morslib as far as like how it affects things is, imagine you have a slider of like intensity. Morslib kicks it all the way over, like just all the way to the max.
If you're playing a game, all you do is you change the difficulty modifiers for various things, because it's exactly the case. Things go weird.
Yeah. Also, for funsies, really, this is one of those situations. Go watch the LAWhammer series. Like when they are in Bogenhofen and Morslib comes out, it has a dramatic impact on everything going on. The fucking lead boxes. Oh my god. leave the players come up with a stupid solution.
Fucking hell.
They're like, I just have to say, watching that and being like, you have a bright wizard, just like melt the box down or like cut it open and make it into a flat. They're like, no, we'll just wear it on our heads. It'll be fine. It's like, what is wrong with you people? The world is relying on idiots.
It's because they're kids. They're just children.
It's so funny. It's so funny of just like, man,
I love it.
If they have a situation they can make more difficult, they will make it more difficult.
It's their job. I love it.
Let's see. We talked about Moonclaw and relationship to the Beastmen. It's complicated. We kind of went over all that. Yeti 13. How do the various cultures of the world interact with Morslib, such as ancient Nerkarns? Well, I'll tell you this. There is a section in the Demon's Army book. I'm just going to read it. It's a very short little paragraph that I'll just hit real quick. So it says...
an extra byte.
Yeah, do that. So it says this about all the other cultures. It says, in the Drakewald and Musion in Bretonia, peasants abandon their hovels and take shelter in the castles and fortified inns. In the Ogre Kingdoms, vast cauldrons of bloody meat are sacrificed to appease the Great Maw and secure its protection. Beneath Zuf Bar, ill-famed caverns are sealed tight by runesmiths, their exits guarded by dour ironsmiths and eager slayers. Across Ulthuan and in the depths of Athel Loren, prayers are whispered to Aisha and Ashurin in the light of the sacred phoenix flames. Rich and poor, young and old, all hope that the evils of Geheimnisnacht will pass over them. All hope that the night of evils will leave them unmarked by its infinite malice. And that kind of applies to Morslib in general, of that if Morslib is active, a lot of the things that can go bump in the night will. And the thing is, it's not just like, oh, mutation. You have to think of it, demons have a much easier time of manifesting spontaneously. The dead do not rest easy. You don't even need a necromancer. If Morslib is close enough and the dead have not been properly interred, they'll just get up and start moving around. Or spirits that are not at rest will be able to manifest and start affecting the living. And these are all generally very bad things.
It's interesting we didn't even plow down into the whole, it floods the world with magic and all the magic things wake up stuff. We sort of hinted at it as we went, but it is absolutely the case. And it pops up as a constant thing in both comics and the video games and Etal, because they love throwing up the big, huge green moon in the sky. And then suddenly dead start lifting themselves out of the graves, green light bathing them. It makes for some really iconic Warhammer imagery, and it's something that comes up again and again, and that's largely because of Morrslieb and its influence on the world.
Yeah, and actually, just to reiterate how bad it can be, as far as demons and undead, even natural creatures that can be woken up by magic, like big dragons, ancient dragons, there's a much higher chance of them waking up when Morslib is full and close, because all that extra magic can cause them to stir and wake up. And all sorts of other different creatures or things that have been warded, sealed away, those wardings are more likely to fail in those instances a lot of the time, and those things will break out. So if you're ever having a campaign with it, have fun, go crazy.
I'd like to just directly answer this with could a Dragon Ogre wake up? Go watch our Dragon Ogre stream, and a lot of the answers will be in there. But if you want to see an example on that, one of the LAWhammer, one of the LAWhammer streams deals with the encounter of something that might be a very old Dragon Ogre. And if it is, it moves.
Yeah,
and there has
the short answer is yes.
Significant influence of Morslib in and around that area. So the short answer is, could it? It could certainly send it stirring.
Yeah, I would say yes. Just to make it easier. Let's see. Bellacorn's Rockmaster. Did the ogres worship the Great Maw, which was a giant ball from the sky? So do they worship Morslib? I would say no, not really, because I think you're giving the ogres a little bit too much credit as far as connecting ideas. The ogres wouldn't look at Morslib and be like, oh, it's like the Great Maw that also was once a meteor. They would just look at it and be like, oh, it's a big thing in the sky.
I think there's definitely something here for when Morslib swells and its gut gets big. I think there would definitely be parts of their cosmology and the tales that they share with each other that would account for Morslib getting fat and big and them thinking that Morslib has reached some sort of potential that it had. But it gets small again, which makes it kind of pathetic. So there's definitely something in there for a really good myth for what Morslib is as far as the ogres are concerned. But it's not the great entity that really matters, because most of the time it's slim, it's small, and it's insignificant. Fuck that moon.
Yeah, and the passage I read off earlier talks about that they have their own stuff they do on Geheimnisnacht, of that I think they understand that things are more dangerous when Morslib gets really big, and that chaos is more likely to do things. And they live in the Mountains of Morn. Mountains of Morn are a very magically charged land. So that's when living mountains or living glaciers are going to be more active. So for them, yeah, I'm sure they're aware of it and they realize things are going to be spicy, but I don't think they give the moon itself any particular respect or worship.
We've just been infiltrated at this end by some LAWhammer players. How exciting. I was like, oh, hey, Kath. Did not expect to see Kath just come in the corner there. That's Birdie, for those of you who are watching the Warhammer streams.
I love Birdie, even though she needs to... that rune fang. Oof.
that rune fang.
Yeah. Captain of my souls, as far as I'm aware, I think we've already answered this. We talked about they're Morslib. I will say it is undoubtful to me that the dwarves and elves and every race that does not speak Reichspiel will have its own name for more. That will probably be relatively similar in some ways. But like Bretonnians probably wouldn't call it Morrslieb. They probably would call it Mors something else.
I've written this, so I know I've got it somewhere.
Yeah,
I've named it.
If Andy digs it up, we'll like post it.
I will find it in
the
a
community tab
because
somewhere.
I definitely have this written somewhere, and I wrote it for a book, and I'm quite convinced it was at least sent through for publishing. I just don't know where it is.
That being said, I will say for Cathayan stuff, they do use like Chinese or Mandarin for Cathayan. So if someone wants to actually take a crack at like what our word for moon is, that is the word they would use for Morslib. They'd probably use something very similar. Though I don't know. Quen actually might.
I don't think they would,
because she might actually name it. Which I don't know what they would call Morslib. I don't know.
I don't think it would be attached to Mor at all, because they really do distance themselves from the whole concept.
Well, it's like I would think they would call it like Chaos Moon, but they actually would probably have a very specific term for it, because they Games Workshop has actually made the Dark Gods, like they all have names in Cathayan, which are actually very well done. Like we know Xin Chi, Xian Chi, but the other three have names as well, but I'd have to look them up because I've got it saved as a bookmark somewhere. But I've read their names translated, and it's actually quite clever. But anyway, let's see. Biofoot, wait, what? I think he's kind of asking, like, given that the Chaos Moon is magic and therefore like crazy and bonkers reality wise, could it actually have part of it made out of cheese? And I think the answer would actually hilariously enough be technically yes. Yeah. you could find the cheese part of Morslib. Let's see. Earnest question. In the world that was, it was venerated by many different factions. Is this also the case in Age of Sigmar with the Bad Moon? Interestingly, no. The Bad Moon is not worshipped or venerated by all of the other factions because of it has very specific effects relating to the goblins as far as the fungal aspects. In that the goblins are drawn to it, they have a very innate relationship with it. It's charged with Gur, or the energy of Gorka Morka, and it literally spawns fungal. Hey, Mike, thank you so much, Michael. Appreciate that. It spawns like endless fungal growths. It does not do things that most of the other races like, because only the goblins are very, very fond of that, and they enjoy being in its light. Whereas like Chaos Warriors, Beastmen, humans, elves, dwarves, if they're in its light, it's a profoundly unpleasant experience. Let's see. Can you better tell it? Oh, okay. Wait, what? This is an interesting question. I don't know if he said the correct character for this, so I'm going to read it out. You tell me, Andy. Malasar asks, can you tell us about the connection between Morslib and Alariel's pilgrimage east to the Tower of the Sun? I don't think Alariel's the right...
I don't recall the story. I'd need to see the source. I don't actually recall that one. And
yeah, Malasar, that one.
I've been doing a lot of Elfie research lately to try and make sure I didn't miss anything. I haven't encountered. So if you could bring this one back, drop into the comments over on Discord, say where did you get the story from, so we can go look it up and go, oh, that one. Oh my god!
Malasar, you could DM me about that one.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Because
I'll pass along
that one because I have actually forgotten that one.
Yeah, that seems like it's from a very... I want to say that seems like it's from like a Black Library thing.
I mean, Alariel, yeah, definitely.
Because the follow-up part says, why did the locals along the way resist the elven advance rather than welcome their savior who keeps the moon from crushing the planet? I will say...
And no one likes the elves.
Yeah, that's true. If that is actually directly tying into... I do vaguely recall there might be something involving... No, it's not End Times. That's not End Times. I want to say there's a writer who wrote something about, I think the elves have a ritual about pushing the Chaos Moon away from the planet that involves the Everqueen.
I have completely forgotten that, which is
really I have the slightest little memory.
Oh, we'll find it out for later. So what's next?
Let's see. We already talked about Moonclaw, Flying Anvil. Thank you so much for the comment, though. Jiggy.
Demons.
Why did Nagash not simply fly to Morslib and spam magic from there?
Demons. It's basically the realms of chaos. Why didn't Nagash fly to the gate and spam spells from there? It's also releasing magic of all kinds. The reason is because it's not an easy thing to do. And it's potentially an almost impossible thing to do, because do you know how far it is to just keep on going up? It takes a long, long time to do that sort of thing, and all sorts of magic could go wrong.
Ooh, this is a good question for Andy.
It's a fun one. Yes, which one?
Where'd it go? Where did here we go. Would the Hag Witches of Kislev try and ward against Morslib's power, or would they use it in performing their dark rituals?
So the Hag Witches use spirits. At least if we go with their original iteration. Now they're slightly different if you look at how they're being presented over in the Total War game. But let's say we run with that version of them. They're using spirits to utilize the magic for them. So first, the Hag Witches would do nothing. The Hag Witches would be talking to the spirits in their behalf. Now, spirits become magically active and enlivened during Morrslieb's, let's say, phases. And as it gets closer and as its light shines down and everything, the spirits light up. The question really is, through dealing with the spirits, do they gain any measure of protection from the worst that the light has to offer? And I think that the hags in particular, the answer would be yes. Much of their magic is about warding and pushing things back through a host of a variety of crazily complicated rituals. So I think the answer is yes. They're all about protecting against the influence of the dark gods, upon which you would also probably apply the influence of Morslib. There will be methods of ensuring that the spirits do not interact with others. So, yeah. Do they use the magic themselves, though, to do stuff? No, because they don't use magic like that. That's not quite how they work.
Yeah, I would say the hags would certainly be busy with rituals. There could be a lot of things that would be happening. If you were doing like a Kislev campaign, you could have a lot of fun with like, there are some spirits that maybe demand something when Morslib is full,
the spirits are going to be more powerful, so they're going to be much more useful and also more demanding.
Yeah, you could actually have a lot of fun with that in a campaign.
Yeah, loads of fun.
Let's see. Does Morslib have chaos gates or tears where demons flood its surface? It's made of magic. It's literally a so it has no tears because it just is that. Let's see. Why isn't Morslib a god in the physical plane like the Great Maw is? It kind of is. It's just it kind of is. It is in the physical plane. It is a physical object. It is not like a mirage or a fake object. It's fully real. It just moves very erratically. It doesn't like to obey the laws of physics.
Does what it looks like from the planet reflect what it looks like up there? Almost certainly not, because of all the magic involved. So it's a really complicated thing, but bluntly, it's there. So yeah,
this is a great question from Jiggy as well. Do eclipses have any unique relationship with Morslib? Huge relationships with Morslib.
Yeah. So Morslib's orbit is not like our real world moon. Our real world moon is on an elliptic, which means that when it's full, you can see it full from across the world. Everybody sees it full across the world, regardless of where they are. And as it moves through its phases, regardless of where you are, you will see it move through phases. But when it's full, everyone sees it full at the same point. And it's only at that relatively rare point and its elliptical orbit when the sun, the moon, and the earth line up that you get your eclipses. Morrslieb's eclipses are going to be freaking weird. And that's because it's constantly moving at a variety of different speeds in different directions. But on top of that, it doesn't have a nice handy elliptic orbit. It's going in different directions there. And it's also further in, further away. Sometimes its eclipse will be like the tiniest small dot in terms of the amount of light that would be obscured. It would be a very weird thing to see, but sometimes it would be wiped out entirely in terms of the amount of light that would reach it from the sun. Equally, it also glows with its own internal light, so sometimes when it's in eclipse, you'd never see it. It would still be glowing. Yeah. So the answer is, this is so complicated that you would almost certainly need to set up about 50 different versions, all of which would have 50 different methods that wizards could manipulate the way that the magic is being reflected on the world, according to what phase it's in, according to how big it is, according to all the rest, that it's effectively one gigantic tool for writing.
Yeah, what I will say is there is a very strong reinforced point in the lore that there's two instances that are really important to keep in mind. If Morslib does an eclipse where it is in front of something, and it blocks all of the natural light so that it is the only source of light. So it blocks the moon or it blocks the sun. That is really fucking bad. That is really, really bad. Like something horrible is about to happen.
Green light time. Oh yeah.
The alternative is there is an extremely, extremely rare number of instances where the moon, Morslib, will block Morslib. So Morslib goes behind it. And that is considered the best case scenario because Morslib cannot affect the world. And that moment is brought up emphatically in the Lizardmen, in that when the Lizardmen know that if Morslib goes behind Morslib, that is the one instance they get every wherever that they can basically make perfect predictions. Their magic works exactly like it's supposed to. They can see prophecy perfectly. Everything is exact. And Tedoecho, we actually get to see him do this in one of the stories in the Lizardman book, where Morslib eclipses Morslib, and he's able to see everything. Like he sees the entire Skaven under Empire. He sees a lot of information, and his magic is unstoppable. And he uses it to destroy the Skaven undercity underneath Ketza, which is like their big one. He drops a meteor on it and just obliterates it. And the Skaven of Clan Pestilence suffer a major defeat in Lustria. And that ties directly into that concept. So generally speaking, if you want to have like a big, the good guys have a chance to do something awesome moment, you want Morslib blocks Morslib. If you want something really, really awful is going to happen and predictable magics become completely unpredictable and crazy shit hits the fan, you want Morslib blocks either the sun or Morslib. Which, man, that's something I actually don't. Yes, got it. That is actually something we don't actually terribly see often, is like a solar eclipse with Morslib.
I agree. I think that's super interesting. And I can't believe it's not come up. I was thinking about this before the stream went live. I'm thinking about all the different ones, and I could think of so many different types of eclipse that I was just left going,
man,
crap.
it'd be super bad for the players if that happened in LAWhammer.
You're not wrong. I've been thinking of it.
Okay, I'm going to blow through the rest of these questions because we're actually on a quick timer, and if we don't get any of these live, then I will just answer them in text later. But a lot of these we've already answered, so no, we already done that. We already did that.
Well,
we did all that. We already did that. We did that. Beastmen rituals, usually like big like parties. They're like feasts, crazy parties, lots of eating and
orgiastic parties.
Orgiastic, yeah, just anything to indulge the senses and to celebrate.
Yeah. They do like to rot to do the old Beastmen.
Yeah, though there are some funny notes that there are some shamans that prefer like a more like structured thing to give actual offering, whereas some Beastmen use it as just a chance to purely party, and that does cause some hilarious conflicts. Morgr does not really have much of an interaction with Morslib, thank goodness, because he's already a busy enough character as is. Okay, I think we're pretty much good. There's some like really specific questions from Infiltrator of Troy that I see involves actual math, which I'm going to skip. Thank you for the question. I'll try and check that out later and see if I can tackle that. Very
math. Oh my goodness.
He's bringing up
like that. I love math.
He's bringing up like actual like the gravitational forces of the moon and stuff. I'm like, I don't fucking. All right. Okay, the last few questions. Okay. This is an interesting, very quick question. Do you think there's a best version of a culture anthropomorphizing Morslib? Which is a really interesting question. So, like, the Nehakarans kind of have Sakmet as the green bag.
So you've got that. I mean, you could argue Moonclaw is that to a degree as well. I'd say that the Nehakarans definitely. And as I'm going through each one of them, no. In fact, it's probably the Nehakarans who do it best.
Yeah, and like it's usually referred to in like a hag sense. So
you could argue that many Skaven associate the moon with the horned rat directly, which is a good reason to hide yourself as far away from the horned rat as you possibly can, because who wants to have the horned rat looking over your shoulder every 2 minutes? If ever there was a reason to stay underground, it was that. But yeah, I can't think of another off the top of my head.
Yep. The rest of these questions I think we've pretty much tackled. Did Cripple Peak was caused by a meteor from Morslib? Probably.
Yeah, probably.
yeah, the rest of these, yep. I think the rest of these was pretty much tackled. So appreciate all the questions, y'all. We're gonna go ahead and call it there just because we gotta go. We're out of time. And
time. Oh, how rude.
Yeah, thank you all so much for watching. Just a couple of quick reminders. Next week, Gav Thorpe. Gav Thorpe is going to be on here for next week, which is super duper exciting. So be sure to drop by. We're going to be over on Andy's channel next week.
Yes, we are.
So we're going to have
you get over there, like, subscribe, do all those things we keep on saying you should do.
Yeah, Dorothy's Man Servant. I would say yes.
Yes.
Yes, because he would be the inverse of that. So yeah.
Definitely.
And thank you all so much for joining us. Make sure to go check out and subscribe to the LAWhammer channel. Like a comment was brought up earlier, we're less than 2,000 subs away from the quick head taker video, which I'll release at 5,000 subs on LAWhammer. Also, make sure to check out Rookery Publications. They've got a lot of really cool stuff going on there, so go subscribe to them over on YouTube.
Actually, I can tell you what we're doing this week as well. We're going to be having D&D's cartographer on, Mike Schley, who does pretty much every single awesome map you've seen from D&D. And he's also done cool maps like the Fighting Fantasy maps for the sorcery apps and a whole variety of other stuff. Mike's done tons of stuff. He's coming on to discuss how to use maps to not just be maps, but to actually illustrate the worlds as a whole. It's going to be super fun, and also illustration as well. So that's next Saturday at 7 p.m. UK time, where we'll have a good hour with Mike chatting about cool stuff.
Yes, or 1 p.m. CST if you're on the other side.
Thanks very much.
Yep, and then LAWhammer every Friday, same time, 1 p.m. CST, 7 p.m. BST. And I think that's everything. So
I don't think it is. You've missed something very important. We're on Loremaster of Sotek's channel,
if you're here,
and he always forgets to say, please like, subscribe, and share all the cool shit that he has, because it's awesome. And yes, you definitely should, because we're now on the long trawl to try and reach 100,000 followers over on the YouTube channel for him. That's only 30,000 away. We can surely do that in a few weeks.
Wow, all right.
We'll be right through that. So please,
reasonable expectations here, Andy.
I have reasonable expectations. I obviously clearly understand how this all works. So that being the case, go like, share, do the thing, because poor old Sotek needs your help.
Oh my God. Mornington Crescent, you should be ashamed of yourself. Please like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. I like it.
I like it
over here. I love that.
But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. We gotta go. So take care. I will be going through the Ideas for Sotek channel to pick up any of the questions we didn't have time for, just to give answers to those. And we thank you all for joining us. Be sure to pop by the Ideas for Sotek channel if you want to submit questions for Gav Thorpe. We're opening up that right now because there's no vote for next week. And we'll see you guys on the LAWhammer channel next week. So thanks for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.